This is Atomic Shinobi, and today I'm going to narrate what if Dark Naruto was trained by 5th Mizukage. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Now, wasting no more time, let's start the story.
The sun was shining brightly on the people of Konoha, and the skies were clear, free of impending storms. As merchants started to flood into the village, which was quite normal in a village of this stature, the streets were crowded with traffic. The opportunity to sell their goods behind the walls of Konohagakure no Sato attracted merchants from far and wide. However, they had never been in such a large number. The village's streets were lined with vendors selling silk, fine metals, wine, honey, and anything else that could be bartered. Dozens of both civilians and shinobi flocked to each stall to purchase their wares. Two chunin at Konoha's front gates were becoming irritated with the increasing number of merchants entering and leaving the village. The chunin exams were the cause of this chaos in the village. The chunin exams preliminary round had only been held the day before, and a series of matches had been used to select the finalists. After it was announced who had been chosen to proceed, all of the traders from Konoha to Suna packed up their goods and rode as quickly as they could to Konoha. Damn Izumo. How many does that make today? The two chunin guarding the gate said as they finally took a break and sat back in their chairs. Ingoing, or outgoing? Asked the now named Izumo, turning to face the two stacks of documents to his right, each about the height of a small child. In any case, I believe we just broke the record for the most paperwork signed by gate guards, he said. Damn, sighed the other chunin, we had better get a fucking reward for our pain and suffering. Izumo laughed and said, relax Katetsu, isn't it reward enough to meet all these interesting people? Unless they have a decent rack, a pretty face, and are hot, I really don't care, scowled the now named Katetsu. Izumo let out a sigh and turned to face the path. His eyes grew as big as dinner plates and he started to splutter. Oh come on, please tell me we aren't getting another rush? We just finished the last 3 minutes ag. Aggh, Katetsu moaned. Izumo took hold of his hair and forced him to look down the path. He received the exact same response, but it wasn't for the reason Katetsu had anticipated. Three figures, who were clearly shinobi based on their stance, were making their way down the path toward the village. The initial figure was a boy with thick, rimmed glasses, spiky light blue hair, and a fish-shaped bandaged object on his back. He was dressed in camouflage pants and a long, sleeved blue, striped shirt, with a kirigakure headband sewn into the front. The second figure showed a middle-aged man wearing a talisman with the kanji word for to hear in each ear and an eye patch over his right eye. He had bluish hair and was dressed in a green robe with a striped shirt and pants with the same pattern. The final and unquestionably most notable figure was the most stunning woman Katetsu or Izumo had ever laid eyes on. The woman's auburn hair was tied in a top knot with a dark blue band and in a herringbone pattern at the back, reaching her ankles. Her single left eye was light green, and her four bangs, two of which were long enough to cross over her chest and the shorter ones covering her right eye, accentuated her beautiful facial structure. Standard kunoichi shorts were worn underneath her long-sleeved, dark blue dress, which hung just below her knees. She had on high-heeled sandals as well. Women would sacrifice their lives for her figure. Her figure was slim and attractive, and her breasts were big and voluptuous. As the three arrived at the front desk, Katetsu and Izumo were looking at the woman and blushing profusely. There was a pause before Katetsu nervously interrupted, trying to keep his eyes from her amazing cleavage as he said, may we help you miss? With a smile, the woman turned to face Katetsu. Well, first, wish to thank you for restraining yourself from staring at my cleavage. Unlike your friend here. Her final statement was so incredibly sweet that Izumo turned his head away and yelled. He continued to smile, as for how you can help me. We're here to speak with the Hokage in regards to a possible alliance. After clearing his throat and shaking his head, Katetsu said, well, may I ask who you are? Oh, how foolish of me. It is quite rude of me to not offer my name. I am Meitarumi. Godem Mizukage of Kirigakure no Sato, the woman said with a smile and a quiet laugh. What? Katetsu sputtered and swallowed. Yes, is there something wrong with that? Smiled the now named Mei. No, it's just that I am surprised. I thought Kiri was in a civil war? Katetsu shook his head. The middle-aged man decided to speak up at that point and said, a little too harshly, we won. Mei turned back to Katetsu and scowled at the man, saying, now be nice, we do not want to start off negotiations by scaring one of the chunin guards. I apologize for that, has never been one for manners. As her smile made him feel so uneasy, Katetsu gulped and said, it's nothing, no worries. He coughed and turned to face Azumo, saying, Azumo. Why? Yes? Azumo asked, turning back to face Kotetsu while avoiding Mei. Please find the necessary forms for visiting diplomats, please. Kotetsu asked, gesturing to the papers. Azumo nodded and hurried to the back to locate them, but Kotetsu looked up at Mei and said, I apologize for the inconvenience, but you must understand that this is simply protocol. Mei nodded. Oh, no worries, we do the same thing in our village. Only we also strip search all visiting dignitaries and diplomats to be certain no assassins can get in. When strip search was mentioned, Kotetsu flushed and swallowed the lump in his throat. I see, he said. Azumo removed all the required paperwork from the back and set it on the desk before he could further embarrass himself. Oh. Okay, I will need name, title, reason for being here, number of individuals in your party, and your seal if you would be so kind, he said. I do not mind at all. Mei said with a gentle smile, taking the paper and starting to complete the necessary tasks. She reached up to her shirt and pushed it aside after she had completed all of the writing. Kotetsu and Azumo flushed and started to splutter. Then Mei produced what looked like a chain with a ring on it. Before pressing the ring onto the paper and carefully taking it off, she took it off the chain and put it on her finger, making it glow a little. Then she slipped the ring back into her shirt and put it back on the chain. Kotetsu carefully took the paper after clearing their minds of any filthy ideas, saying, Thank you, enjoy your stay. Mei turned away with a gentle smile and said, I surely hope that we shall. Ow, Chojuro, come. She said as she started to leave, her entourage rapidly following. Azumo and Kotetsu watched as they entered the village, then let out a deep breath they were unaware they were holding. The paper was released by Kotetsu, who said, That was the most awkward moment I have had since our genin days. Azumo sighed as he put the paper in a different pile after nodding his head and reaching over to take it. Yeah. Alongside Mei Terumi observed the sights as she strolled leisurely through Konoha's streets. Since she first visited the village more than 13 years ago, when she was only 7 years old, the day her parents took her to meet her future father. Not much has changed. No, he is dead. Do not dwell on the past, Mei said, shaking those thoughts from her mind. When Ao saw Mei's state, he scowled. Few people were aware, but Mei was once set up to wed Minato Namikaze's son. Even so, the son in question had not yet been born. At the tender age of 7, Mei joyfully accepted the marriage contract, and she spent a whole year getting ready for the day she would finally get to meet her future husband, but it was not to be. 12 years before today, the village had been attacked by the Kyubi no Yoko. Her unborn fiancé and his parents were among the hundreds, if not thousands, of people killed in the attack. Mei was devastated when the news was delivered. Although Kiri needed this alliance or they would return to civil war within months, Ao could see how painful it was for her to travel to Konoha after all she had lost. Maybe we should postpone the meeting with the Hokage until tomorrow. It has been a long journey, and you could use your rest so that you may be in top condition for finalizing the alliance, Ao said, putting a hand on Mei's shoulder as he watched her become increasingly upset over the familiar sights in the village. It is fine, Ao, I am perfectly capable of, Mei said, turning to face Ao with a strained smile. When she continued, Ao interrupted, saying, Mizukage. Sama. Please, I implore you, rest. Ao's abrupt response surprised Mei, who sighed, Very well, we shall rest for tonight, then greet the Hokage in the morn. After grinning, Ao said, Thank you, Mizukage, Sama. Mei grinned and spun around, but as she nearly fell over an orange blur, her eyes widened and she leapt to the side. She lost her footing and landed on her ass, splattering dirt on her dress. As they knelt down to assist her in standing up, Ao and Chojuro cried out in concern, Mizukage. Sama. Are you injured, Mizukage? Sama? If he so much as placed a single hair in harm's way, Chojuro started to babble. Mei shook her head, saying, No, Chojuro, I am fine. She got to her feet slowly, saying, But when I get my hands on that kid, She looked to see who had knocked her down, but even as he ran away, his back was turned, and she could see the hair of the potential attacker. The man whose son she was arranged to marry had the same hair. No. It can't be, I was told he died, she said, her eyes widening and trembling. She swiftly followed the blonde-haired person, leaving Ao and Chojuro in her wake, despite her internal cries to the contrary. Mizukage. Sama, wait, Ao yelled after her, but she ignored him. He then turned to Chojuro and said, Come on, kid, we have to get after her fast. Ao hurried after Mei, and Chojuro followed as fast as he could. In the meantime, a blonde, blue-eyed genin ran through the streets of Konoha. He had a lead headband around his forehead and was dressed in a neon orange jumpsuit. The people around him started yelling hateful rumors as he ran through the streets. "Look, there he is. Avoid him at all costs, or he will murder you. Why doesn't the demon spawn simply die?" As the blonde-haired genin fled into the surrounding forest, he was subjected to all of these and other similar insults. After running through the trees, he eventually reached an open field with a lake right in the middle. Recalling what had happened just minutes before, the blonde-haired genin collapsed to his knees and slammed his fist into the floor. Rewind. "What do you mean I'm not allowed to see Sasuke? He's my teammate for Kami's sake." Naruto Uzumaki was standing at the reception desk, persistently pestering the receptionist. The receptionist turned to him and said, "I mean you are not allowed to see Uchiha-san. Now get out of here before I have you detained by Anbu for refusing to cooperate." A hand landed on Naruto's shoulder as he was about to continue, growling, "That will not be necessary, miss. I will see to it that he does not do this again." When Naruto looked up, he saw Kakashi Hitaki, his sensei. "Make sure that this thing does not do so again, Shinobi-san," the receptionist said with a frown. The way the woman described him made Naruto cringe, as did Kakashi's reaction. "I assure you, it will not happen again." Kakashi then pulled Naruto aside and turned to face him, frowning. "Naruto, I am not going to mince words with you. When you do stuff like this, it gives me a bad reputation as a teacher, so either start acting more mature, or hand in your shinobi resignation, because I will not waste my time with somebody who does not even take their shinobi training seriously." Kakashi. "Sensei, I understand. So can you please help me train for the finals against Nae?" Naruto said, glancing down at that before turning to face Kakashi. "No. I will be exclusively training Sasuke for the next month." Naruto yelled as loudly as he could, "What? But what about me? What about you?" Kakashi scowled even more beneath his mask. "I have to fight Neji Hyuga in the first rounds. He is more skilled than any of our class, and could easily wipe the floor with me. I need to get stronger so I can beat him," was Kakashi's casual dismissal of Naruto, which infuriated him. In a mix of amusement and disgust, Kakashi snorted and spat out, "You beat Neji? That is almost as laughable as you actually managing to achieve your dream of being Hokage." The severity of Kakashi's remark shocked Naruto, who said, "But." He shoved Naruto to the side and started to leave, but he turned around and said, "You can barely do the tree walking exercise, and your teammates are already on advanced water walking, if you can't even get basic tree walking down, what makes you think you will ever amount to anything in life?" In the most venomous tone he could manage. "Listen here, and listen well, Naruto. I will not waste my precious time on someone whose skills are so low that an academy student could beat you. The only reason I had you as a student was because it was the only way I got Sasuke on my team. I don't give a shit about you, and I never will." Final flashback. Naruto then left the hospital and made his way to the closest training area. His only concern was getting to the training ground. He didn't care who he ran into. Trying to catch his breath, Naruto gasped and glanced up at the training logs in the clearing. As he stood up and approached the logs, his eyes narrowed. He then screamed in rage and started driving his fists into the log, severing his knuckles, while imagining that the log in front of him represented the faces of all the people who had ever wronged him. He continued to savagely attack the logs, oblivious to the three people concealed in the bushes behind him. Within the bushes, Mei Terumi couldn't believe what she was seeing. It simply couldn't be real. Her long-thought dead fiancé was standing in front of her, training so hard. It simply isn't possible. No, it can't be. He must be dead. They said that. Mei interrupted herself as the realization hit her. They had been informed that he had passed away, but they had not received any supporting evidence. Mei's eyes narrowed in rage as she growled, "Sandame." She recalled how the Sandame had visited their house 12 years prior and informed them that her fiancé, along with his father and mother, had perished in the Kyuubi attack. However, her fiancé was still alive and well. She had been misled by the Sandame. She rose quickly and walked toward the Hokage Tower, Ao and Chojuro following closely behind. "Ao, Chojuro. Come, the Sandame has the answers to many questions, and he will answer them," she said harshly. One could have sworn to see the Shinigami's face in Mei's eyes. Alongside Naruto continued hitting the wooden training post until he hit it, causing a tremendous wave of pain to shoot through his arm and knock him to his knees. With a gasp, Naruto turned to face his knuckles. He had been striking the post with such force that the wood had scraped his finger bones and sliced through his knuckles. Blood was streaming from his knuckles like a faucet. With a curse, he hit the post once more, causing it to ache once more. He remembered what Kakashi had said, and he kept his fist exactly where he had struck, glaring hotly at the ground. You can barely do the tree walking exercise, and your teammates are already on advanced water walking, if you can't even get basic tree walking down. What makes you think you will ever amount to anything in life? I will show you how much better I am than my teammates, Kakashi, Naruto said, gritting his teeth and casting a heated gaze at the lake. Naruto grabbed his fist off the post, put it in a ram seal, charged his chakra toward his feet, and stepped onto the lake's surface. As soon as he noticed his foot on the water, he put the other one beside it and started to move farther out onto the lake. Naruto snarled to himself, "I will accomplish this, without anyone's help," as his foot briefly went under. As he walked out toward the center of the lake, he pulled his foot out of the water and placed it back on top of it, adding even more chakra to it. Every time he pulled it out and charged more chakra into it, his feet continued to push down into the water. He felt himself getting tired, but he ignored it because he was determined to finish this exercise as if he had done everything in his life alone. Naruto had nearly fallen through the water multiple times by the time he reached the center of the lake. His eyes were filled with the icy resolve he had pushed himself with for years, and his face was smeared with perspiration. Naruto advanced one more step before both of his feet plunged through the water's surface, landing on his knees. "Just a bit more," he said, flashing his teeth. As he started to slowly emerge from the water around him rippled and churned as he charged as much chakra as he could into his feet. Naruto lifted his foot and continued to charge chakra into it as he took a final step toward his objective, grinning with satisfaction. When an unimaginable amount of pain flooded his body, he screamed in pain, "Ack-hhh," as he lost concentration on his chakra and fell into the lake below, landing squarely in the middle of it. Naruto's cry of pain persisted as he submerged himself entirely beneath the water's surface, and water started to fill his lungs. His eyes grew wide as he grasped his throat, attempting to release the water, only to breathe in more of it. He attempted to swim up and out, but a second wave of pain ripped through him like a knife through flesh. Going deeper and deeper into the lake than he had initially believed, Naruto continued to flail as his body was consumed by pain and watched the light from the sun begin to fade away. He also kept trying desperately to swim up as he went deeper and deeper into the lake. As he struggled to escape, Naruto glanced down at the lake's bottom to gauge his distance from it. His eyes widened at what he saw. He was going straight down toward a huge fissure at the lake's bottom that was either too hazy to see the bottom or deeper than the lake itself. As he fell through the crevice and into the unknown, he looked back up and swam even harder to swim up towards the still, fading sunlight in the distance. Naruto's vision was fading as he attempted to grasp the underwater canyon's sides, but his grasp failed and he kept sinking to the bottom. His eyes slowly started to close as he hit the bottom because he was experiencing a feeling he had fought to suppress all of his life. Hatred. Hatred for the villagers who have been trying to kill him since he was born because of something beyond his control. Hatred for the teachers who prevented him from surviving and made it impossible for him to get the strength he needed to live. And hatred for everyone who has hurt him, from the abuse, the beatings, the vile looks, etc. His hatred was directed at specific people, including Kakashi, who was clearly just as blind as the other villagers and was cast aside to be devoured by the wolves. His hatred for his teammates, who harassed and taunted him daily without cause, and his hatred for the Sandaime, who had permitted his harm since the day of his birth, for informing the public that the Kyuubi was sealed inside of him. And lastly, his hatred for the Yondaime, who initially caused him pain. He, the real hero of Konoha, is treated as the plague and suffers daily as a result of the Yondaime's decision to use him, while the man who sacrificed him for the village's prosperity and cast him to the wolves had been revered as a saint for years. Thus, as his life unfolded before his eyes and his hatred consumed him, he at last came to terms with the reality. For being the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Yoko, Konoha would never accept him. He had no family. He was an orphan who was loved by no one, and if he had any remaining family, they most likely left him as soon as they learned who he was. He had no friends, just people who did not yet understand who he was. He really didn't have anything left to live for. As his hand brushed past an ancient rune, which caused it to glow an unholy shade and wrap itself around Naruto's arm, he exhaled a final breath as bubbles rose from his mouth and he gradually started to close his eyes. As the runes encircled him, Naruto's eyes widened once more, and he foolishly tried to remove them with his remaining energy. As he continued to flail with what little energy he had left, the runes moved up his arms and wrapped around his other arm. He continued to flail as he attempted to free himself from the runes, which continued to move across his shoulders and up his arms. Before everything turned black, he screamed one last time as the runes started to stretch across his head and wrap around his neck. The water he was drowning in silenced him. As Naruto's vision brightened, he caught a glimpse of something in front of him. In an attempt to clear his blurry vision, he reached up and rubbed his eyes before taking another look. He was able to see two big figures in front of him as his eyes gradually adjusted. His eyes widened at what he saw, and he rubbed them again as he looked through them more. This was only the least shocking thing that happened to him. He was still trapped beneath the lake, but he had stopped falling. It was as if time had stopped, the water had stopped flowing, the little teeming bits of life had long since stopped moving, and he was floating in mid-fall in the ever-deepening chasm. The two translucent figures in front of him were fully armored and exuded a power that made his heart race just by touching them. The first figure, who was dressed in a suit of pitch-black armor with a faint purple tint to highlight the black, was between 6 and 7 feet tall. To fit the man, the armor had to be expertly made from head to toe. His feet wore specialized armor shaped like a humanoid foot, but the armor was segmented to allow movement of the actual feet inside it, and the nails were curled and pointed. There was a single, crescent-shaped spur on the back of the heels that curved upward like bone. Ancient runes appeared to have been carved into the smooth armor of the shins. There was a single humanoid skull on the armored warrior's knees, but if the elongated canines and narrowed eyeholes were any indication, the skull had inhuman characteristics. Naruto examined his chest armor closely and saw that it was light forging of a skull, which he assumed was based on the man's chest muscle structure. 3 distinct shoulder armor plates were forged together at the base to create a single piece, which made his shoulder pieces unique. The man's biceps, which were bare of armor, displayed a complex rune that extended towards the forearm. It then continued onto the forearm armor, where it wound around what looked like a sword hilt but had an empty slot where the blade would have been. There was a seemingly broken helm beneath his right arm, but it resembled a samurai's helm with a complex crown-like design forged into it. A hood obscured the man's face, casting a shadow over the top of it. His eyes glowed a deep, unholy purple in the shadow, and his mouth and chin were sufficiently exposed to confirm that the figure was a man. He had 2 wings on his back that seemed to be made of nothing but shadow. With a height of easily 8 to 9 feet, possibly even approaching 10 feet, the other figure was much more terrifying to see. It had the same frightful armor as the previous one, fashioned by a master of the craft of smithing, but it was a deep shade of red tinted with the darkest of blacks, giving it a rusted appearance. Upon reaching the knee, the vine-like carvings intertwined themselves and coiled up the knee, encircling what looked like a purple gemstone before the vines shot upward in the shape of a pair of demonic horns. The armor on the being's feet was similar to the previous one, but it had vine-like designs etched or forged into it on the foot and up the shin. The thigh's armor was just chainmail, and while it was clearly well made, it didn't seem like any of the links were bigger or smaller than the others. It had a special belt around its waist, with upward curving spikes, and several gemstones that resembled the ones on the creature's knee. The belt's front was covered in ancient runes and resembled a loincloth made entirely of metal plates connected together. Its armor was designed to give the impression that its chest and abdomen were muscular, but in reality, the armor gave the impression that the chest was as rough as stone. It wore a special piece of armor. The shoulder armor was mostly made up of 3 spikes, each of which spread out evenly like a bird's foot's toes. However, it also had smaller ridged spikes with a giant gem that was similar to the others, but the gems were blazing with a dark energy. The gem rested on the back of each hand, and the armor on its forearms was essentially a gauntlet with the same design as the armor on its feet and shins, vines and all. The armor on its biceps was just plain, rusty-looking chainmail. Each finger had a slight spike on each joint, and each finger ended in a long, hooked, bird-like claw. Its entire face was hidden by a helm that displayed only its 2 glowing unholy red eyes inside a V-shaped slit. The helm's mouth was tightly closed, and holes were inserted into the nostril area to give the impression that it was breathing. On either side of the helm were 2 crescent-shaped spikes that curved upward, and on the forehead of the helm was a single gem interlaced by the same vine-like etching that was prominent on the armor. This encircled a final gem before they shot up and created the design of demonic horns. Its wild mane of white hair spiked up close to the back of the beast's head and framed the front of the helm. 8 large wings were on its back, 4 angelic wings, each tattered and burned in shape but obviously still functional, with several longer feathers trailing off the wing like a bird's tail feathers and each one appearing to carry a different arcane rune. And 4 draconic wings, each tattered but still functional, with runes on each wing that matched those on the other wings. The animal also had a long tail with 3 rows of spikes that trailed from the end. At the very end of the tail, there was a growth that resembled a club and had 3 long spikes that resembled bone on either side. The top of the growth had natural armor on it. The translucent figures continued to gaze at the Jinchuriki with the blonde hair. As the 2 gazed at him, Naruto became very uneasy. "We have heard your thoughts, child, and seen your memories," said the smaller figure after taking a breath. The man's voice sounded like an icy knife being slid from the top of Naruto's spine to the very base, and his entire body froze as he spoke. "It truly is a shame, for one such as you, with potential beyond all others, to die so early. And so pitifully," the other said, picking that precise moment to speak. Looking down and spitting venom, Naruto growled at the two and yelled, "Just shut up and leave me alone. Just leave me be, and let me rest in peace." As the smaller figure said, "What if you could have power?" The two creatures exchanged glances before turning back to face Naruto. Slowly, Naruto lifted his head to gaze at them both. "Power to make almost every living creature bow down to its knees in fear of your mere presence." The smaller figure pointed to his navel and said, "A power that is greater than even the demon sealed inside of you." "Impossible. As much as I hate to admit it, there is nothing as powerful as the Kyuubi. Do you honestly expect me to believe there is a power greater than the mightiest of the Biju?" Naruto said, after staring at them for what seemed like minutes. The two creatures roared in raucous laughter, nearly toppling over as they laughed at him. "What is so damn funny?" Naruto yelled, raising his head. "Why don't you think that the Kyuubi is the mightiest power in existence? Ha ha ha. The Kyuubi is nothing but a fifth of the power of the demon it was once a part of, and even that demon was nowhere near the mightiest," the larger of the two creatures said, managing to gather enough strength to speak. With a bewildered expression, Naruto asked, "What are you talking about?" "Ninjin," the smaller figure said calmly, "what we are saying is that the Kyuubi is but an insect compared to the power that we are speaking of." What power?" asked Naruto, his eyes wide with surprise. Again, the diminutive figure said, "The power of the Highborn." With a bewildered eyebrow, Naruto asked, "Highborn? What are they?" The bigger person said, "The Highborn are a number of mighty races, born in the pits of Makai, or the realms of the abyss, forged in battle and bloodshed from the moment of their birth, and born with powers so great that your Biju would be but a child's play toy to them." Then why have I never heard of them?" Naruto asked tremblingly as his eyes widened in surprise. The bigger person spoke up. "The Highborn since the beginning have kept to themselves, not wanting to bother with the humans, as they are but mere insects to them." Naruto swallowed the lump that was growing in his parched throat. It was amazing. He would be unstoppable if he could harness the power of such a creature, but... Naruto craned his neck. How? How could I possibly obtain this power? And even if I did, how would I use it? I learned the hard way that you can only get so far doing things on your own. Unless you looked into the eyes of the larger figure, you could only see the smaller one smile. Stepping forward, the smaller one declared, "Simple young ninja, we are going to give it to you." What? Naruto's head snapped up in surprise. The bigger one came forward. "Ninja, we are two races of the Highborn, long since dead, our souls imprisoned, and we have grown tired of this endless purgatory, sealed beneath the surface of a world we once called home. But, if we fuse our souls inside of you, then in a way, we shall gain a freedom we have long sought for millennium." But I thought you were dead?" Naruto stammered. The smaller one raised one finger. "While that is true, little ninja, our power will always remain with our souls, not with our bodies. Even if our bodies decay, as long as our soul exists, our power can be used. Just not by us. We have grown tired of our deathless eternity, trapped beneath a mountain of dirt and rubble. We want to be able to at least know that our power will not go to waste." They were offering him a power so great that not even the Kyuubi could hope to challenge it. It was almost too good to be true, and Naruto kept staring at them, not believing what he was being told. What is the catch? Power like this is bound to have several strings attached. So what is the catch? Naruto asked, narrowing his eyes at the two. The two appeared to be grinning at him as they said, "The catch, young ninja, is to surrender your humanity, and the power of the Kyuubi." The bigger said, "Once you have been given our power, the Kyuubi's dark Yuki will be purged, and converted into your own energies. All traces of the Kyuubi will be removed from your body, as if it was never there in the first place. When our souls and power flow through you, it shall convert your body, and force it to adapt, and change so that you may use it. You will become one of the Highborn." This is unbelievable. I am being offered power greater than Kyuubi's, but, if I accept, I will lose my humanity, Naruto thought, his eyes, already widened from shock, so wide they seemed to be about to pop out any moment. Who am I kidding? Why should I care about my humanity in the slightest? I am already hated for being the Kyuubi's Jinchuriki. What is another reason for them to call me a monster? Naruto scowled at himself. With conviction blazing in his eyes, he gazed up at them and said, "I accept." The two smiled at him. "Very well. As you wish." The two beings started to glow brightly, shimmering in the darkness as if time had been turned back on. The larger figure started to glow an unholy red with a blackish outline, while the smaller figure glowed an eerie purple glow. "Brace yourself. Because this is really going to hurt," the two creatures said simultaneously, and then abruptly pushed their whole form into Naruto, leaking in through his navel. As promised, Naruto screamed in pain as the power from the two started to take hold, making him feel as though every nerve in his body had been set on fire. His orange jumpsuit was torn and shredded, exposing his navel and the now seared flesh where the Shikifuan seal had once been. The two energies entwined as they leached from his navel. At last, the energies completely merged and started to seep into one another, forming an unholy purple hue with a black outline tinted blood red that now surrounded Naruto's body. Naruto stopped yelling as the dark energy filled his mouth and eyes. Then, in a single instant, he clutched his head in agony as the dark energy around him crystallized and hardened, adhering to the side of the chasm wall. Meanwhile, at the same time the Sandaime Hokage of Konoha sat in his office, sipping his tea calmly while he signed and sealed the documents in front of him. A mission report from a low-ranking missing nin from Kirigakure who had been tasked with killing the leader of a bandit camp. Kiri's missing nin count had tripled in the past few years since the bloodline purges started more than 5 years ago, and Kiri nins now made up half of the contents of the majority of the official bingo books. Although Kiri's missing nin count appeared to have decreased significantly in recent months, and the bingo book now only contained a fifth of the number of Kiri nins that it once did, the Sandaime wished he could figure out why, but sadly, all of their spies in Kirigakure had been killed when the bloodline purges started. He groaned and glanced at the edge of his desk, where he saw the picture of him and Naruto dining at Ichiraku's. He had repeatedly attempted to stop Minato from carrying out the engagement and had never approved of Minato's decisions to have his son marry the daughter of the Terumi clan's head. However, Minato had been adamant that this arranged marriage would secure a peace treaty with Kirigakure that would last for years to come. It was heartbreaking to watch Naruto's fiancée cry over his death, but he could not allow the heir to not one, but two powerful clans to be given to Kirigakure, and the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Yoko to be given to Kirigakure. He held far too much importance to Konohagakure and the entire shinobi world. The Kyuubi attack was almost a blessing in disguise, as Minato's death allowed him to retake his position as Hokage, and he then informed the Terumi family that Naruto and his parents had perished in the attack. Jiraiya and Hiruzen believed that Naruto was the child of prophecy, the one who would bring peace to the shinobi nations, and that staying in Konohagakure was the only way he could fulfill his destiny. With a sigh, he grabbed his pen and started signing the following document. Sandaime Sama. Hiruzen's secretary was standing in the doorway when he looked up. "Yes, Suzumiya-san. Someone is here to see you," Suzumiya coughed, "and they claim to be a delegation from Kiri regarding a potential alliance." That a delegation from Kiri of all places? The Sandaime's eyes widened in surprise. As an alliance, what could they desire? He waved to Suzumiya while coughing and said, "Send them in." While Hiruzen sat back, put his papers aside, and put away the picture of him and Naruto, Suzumiya nodded and walked out of the room to fetch the delegation. His eyes widened in surprise at the person he saw when his office door opened once more. Mei Terumi, Ao, and an unidentified child with a weapon on his back that was bandaged. He was surprised to learn that Mei and Ao were still alive because, according to what he had been told, the Yondaime Mizukage's wrath had first destroyed the Terumi clan and all of their allies. So why was the clan's heir still alive? With Ao and Chojuro at her sides, Mei approached the desk and grinned at the Sandaime, saying, "It has been quite a long time." "Ah, Sandaime. Sama, how good to see you again." Head nodding, Hiruzen said, "Why? Yes, it has been quite a long time. You seem surprised to see me. Are you not happy to see the granddaughter of an old friend?" Mei scowled at his expression. The mention of his friend, who had been Mei's grandfather and the clan's leader prior to Mei's mother taking over, caused Hiruzen to covertly swallow the lump in his throat. Hiruzen wheezed, "No, it isn't that. I just thought that you were dead. I heard how the Yondaime Mizukage had assaulted your clan first in his anti-bloodline campaign. I am simply surprised that you survived." Mei nodded. The likelihood of the Yondaime Mizukage destroying the entire Terumi clan is extremely slim, as I am sure you are aware. We are not called the mightiest clan in Mizu no Kuni for nothing, just as the Namikaze, Senju and Uchiha clans were not known as the mightiest in Hai no Kuni for nothing. True, so very true. Hiruzen grinned and leaned back. "May I ask what has happened in Kirigakure?" he asked. Mei grinned as her 2 bodyguards were prepared. Well, the rebel forces against the Yondaime Mizukage, Hyuga, successfully brought down his tyrannical regime. I personally was the one who threw him off the balcony of his final hideout into the salt lakes of Mizu no Kuni. For that, I was named the new Godem of Kirigakure, and so came to reforge the alliance that once existed between Konoha and Kiri. Hiruzen looked at Mei and said, "Ah, that is a good thing. After the bloodline purge, the alliance between our 2 villages crumbled. I trust that your trip was not too treacherous." Far from it, Sandame. Sama. However, Mei said, looking out the window towards the village, I found myself upset as I took in the familiar sights of this village. So many memories from what was lost 12 years ago. Hiruzen was unaware that Mei's eyes had taken on a dark glint at the word, treacherous. Yes, the Kyuubi's attack on our village was a tragic one. We lost many good men and women that day, including the entire Namikaze clan, Hiruzen said with a sigh and a cross of his fingers. Mei raised her eyebrows. Yes, that was indeed a tragic loss. The Namikaze clan was a long friend of the Terumi clan, even before the founding of the great shinobi villages. I remember in fact that you were the one to deliver the tragic news upon my family and I when we came to visit Konohagakure. Her tone was icy and detached. With a flicker of fear in their eyes, Ao and Chojuro retreated. That I did, the Sandame nodded, unaware of the danger he was in. Not a day goes by that I wish things had been different. Yes, and in that knowledge. Sarutobi.san. Mei nodded her head. As she spoke, the temperature in the room seemed to drop significantly. A concentrated stream of ki struck the Sandame, causing him to stiffen. Mei turned to face him, her eyes full of a cold rage that would give anyone who saw them nightmares of the worst kind. Why is it that I have just found my deceased fiancé, walking around? Mei asked. When Hiruzen heard those words, his blood froze. The lake the following day, the clouds in the sky gave the impression that a storm was approaching. The lake in the center of the training ground shook and churned, and lightning arced across the sky. As though the lake itself were blowing the wind at everything in its path, the trees started to tremble and wave in the opposite direction. A number of trees near the lake were struck by lightning, catching fire as they toppled over, turning into charred remnants of their former selves. A light started to shine from the lake's center, causing the water to bubble and churn. A steamy mist also hung over the lake's surface. Unlike any waves the lake had ever produced, the water started to wash onto the shore. Inside the lake, the light intensified and glowed like the sun's rays. And as the waters swirled even more, a pillar of unholy purple energy with a black outline tinted blood red briefly emerged before vanishing. A man's figure came up on the shore from the lake's depths. His face was framed by 2 pure black bangs in his shoulder. Length, spiky hair, which was almost bleach blonde but tinted with black highlights. He had somewhat of a tan, but his skin was almost unnaturally pale. His clothes, which only included a pair of ripped and tattered orange sweatpants, barely covered his developed and built body. Small fragments of what looked like crystal were adhered to his body, and his skin had the subtle feel of arcane runes. He opened his eyes just enough to show off a set of amber eyes with a slit in the middle. After blinking a couple of times, he said, "Sin. Seeker." With a dark smile that showed off his long canines and slightly sharpened teeth while his amber eyes glowed sinisterly. "I like it." As the elderly Sandame shuddered in fear of Mei Terumi's stare, her eyes bore holes into Hiruzen's head. "Well, Sandame, I am waiting for an answer." Mei Terumi spoke so coldly that her subordinates thought they could see her breath. Trying to speak with conviction, Hiruzen swallowed hard and said, I have no idea what you are talking about." Mei gazed at Hiruzen for a moment before closing her eyes and letting a tiny, albeit sickly sweet, smile appear on her lips. "Now Hiruzen, I am disappointed in you." Her eyes snapped open as she released even more killing intent, gaining a venomous glare. "Do you honestly think I lead a revolt against Hyuga, Yondaime Mizukage, the Jinchuriki of the Sanbi no Kyodai game, and the most bloodthirsty shinobi to ever come out of Kirigakure no Sato, by being stupid?" As she approached Hiruzen's desk, her chakra started to spike. "Anbu." Hiruzen snapped his fingers rapidly. 6 Anbu leapt from their hiding spots and attacked the Mizukage as soon as he spoke. Chojuro and Ao hastily snatched up their weapons, prepared to strike. Just by raising her chakra, Mei caused the 6 Anbu to instantly be engulfed in flaming flames. When the first Anbu tried to scream in agony, his mask melted onto his face, sealing his lips shut. He fell to his knees and stared at his burning flesh as it melted from his body. His fingers had now melted to the bone, and his bone was starting to join them as he attempted to grasp at his mask. Before he collapsed, his remains turning into a pool of boiling flesh and bone, he screamed in a muffled voice. The bodies of the other 5 Anbu gathered together, the stench of burning flesh becoming stronger and stronger as they met the same end. He hadn't even seen her move a muscle, so Hiruzen's eyes widened in horror at what he saw. She had just done this to his 6 most prestigious Anbu Black Ops by spiking her chakra. He keeled over in his chair and dry heaved whatever was in his stomach as the smell of their boiling flesh reached his nostrils. To think you, the supposed mightiest of the Sarutobi clan, is put off by burnt flesh. Ha! You despicable ingrate. Mei snapped her fingers, putting out the flames that were still burning. She watched in disgust as the supposed Kami no Shinobi keeled over like a civilian at the smell of burnt flesh. With their noses covered, Ao and Chojuro whispered, "And that Chojuro is why I am scared of her." Now Hiruzen, I want you to start explaining why you felt it prudent to tell me that my fiancé was dead, and if you so much as think of lying to me. Mei snarled, grabbing Hiruzen by the scruff of his neck and lifting him off the ground while she left the threat hanging in the air. She held up her hand, and her chakra started licking away at her fingertips like fire. Mei flicked her wrist, melting his emergency intercom, and Hiruzen coughed as he was flung roughly back into his chair. Hiruzen had no choice but to tell her, so he coughed once more and let out a defeated sigh. But then a glimmer of hope came into his mind. Maybe she would comprehend if he explained the rationale behind his actions. Maybe she would even support them. Hiruzen sat as straight as possible. Mei Terumi, at first you may not understand my reasoning for what I did, but perhaps if I explain it to you now that you are older and far wiser, that you will understand. He took a deep breath and started to explain, my student Jiraiya, the only one amongst my students who has actively remained a Konoha shinobi, once met a sage on Mount Myoboku, where the Toad summons make their home. He met the leader of the Toads known as the Great Toad Sage. The Toad Sage made a prophecy that I and Jiraiya have followed for the past few decades. There would come a time that one of Jiraiya's students would become the savior to the shinobi world in. Mei intervened. What does this have to do with anything? As I am sure you know, Jiraiya is not my fiancé's teacher. Otherwise everyone in the elemental nations would have heard of this. That may be, Hiruzen said after inhaling deeply, but Naruto is the child of one of Jiraiya's greatest students, Minato Namikaze. That is it. Naruto is Minato's son, who was a student of Jiraiya. Are you senile? Mei asked, glancing at Hiruzen's arrogant expression. Hiruzen glanced at her. Minato before his death sealed the Kyuubi no Yoko into his son, a child born of both the Namikaze and Uzumaki clans, the 2 most powerful clans in Hai no Kuni. Surely, this was a sign of the prophecy. Minato sealed a powerful being inside of a child whose mere pedigree was a sign of power soon to come. Jiraiya and I realized that the Toad Sage's prophecy was not to be taken as literal as it had been. Minato in a way had been that child of prophecy that the Toad Sage spoke of. He had sired the one who would change the shinobi world. A child born of the blood of Namikaze and Uzumaki, and empowered by the Kyuubi no Yoko itself. The prophecy was coming to pass. One of Jiraiya's students had produced the instrument of peace for the shinobi world. And then, don't you understand, only here, in Konoha, a place of peace, justice, and love could Naruto reach his true potential and become the elemental nation's savior. Before this conversation, I believed Konoha was filled with nothing but arrogant self-destructive fools. But now I see the truth, Mei said, shaking her head and closing her eyes after staring at the Sandaime for a moment. Thinking Mei had seen reason, Hiruzen grinned. Mei reached over and grabbed Hiruzen by the front of his shirt, saying, I realize that this place is an insult to the shinobi way of life. Her words were so hateful and bloodthirsty that Hiruzen was flung several feet away from her mere presence. Prophecy, ideals, savior. Are you fools bred to be this stupid? Or are you trained from the moment you walk to not use what little is left of your brain to process things? You truly are an imbecile. Reach his full potential. The boy can't even properly do the water walking technique, and you say he needs to be here to reach his full potential? At his age, Kirigakure shinobi have already taken their first kill, have already completed a successful interrogation, and have already advanced to Chunin rank. She threw him to the side of the room, smashing him into a bookshelf that shattered upon impact. Chojuro, ow, go find my fiancé and bring him to me now, Mei told them with a sneer as she turned to face them. With an evil look in her eyes, Mei turned to Hiruzen and said, what else have you not told me, old man? What other sins has Konoha committed against me and my fiancé? The two hurriedly bowed and left the office. Hiruzen turned her back. All I have done is F. for the greater G. Good. IIH. Have never committed a sin. You are trying my patience, Sarutobi. What evils have you committed in your narrow, minded quest to make Konoha powerful? Mei said, squinting her eyes and smashing her heel onto Hiruzen's back. Liar, she said, pressing down so hard that the bones in his back started to crack. I am W. Without S.Sin, Hiruzen said, gritting his teeth in agony. Mei squinted and lifted her chakra-coated arm, saying, then die, before swinging it to knock Hiruzen to the ground. Chojuro and Ao rushed in, shouting, Mizukage, Sama, Naruto is gone. What did you say? Mei asked, halting her blow and turning to face Ao. As he felt the intent to kill, Ao gasped, Naruto, he is gone milady. We went to the last place we saw him and there is no sign of him leaving the area. Get every last member of your Anbu off of whatever mission they are on and have them find my fiancé, or so help me the wrath of Kirigakure will be on your head, Mei said, grabbing Hiruzen and slamming him against a wall. Her eyes widened, then narrowed as she dropped him abruptly and left the office, saying, come Ao, Chojuro, our business is done here. She left in a swift motion, and her subordinates did the same. However, before she left, she gave the Sandame a cold glare, saying, you are not even a shadow of your former self. At one time, you were a shinobi worth respecting, but now, you are nothing more than the idealistic shadow of your former self's shadow. That happened yesterday. On the morning of her second day in Konohagakure, Mei gazed out her window. She was unable to contain her disdain as she observed the village. The Sandame had to get his way, and she had heard about her fiancé's treatment, how he had been abused, neglected, and much more, for something he had no control over. Because the Namikaze and Uzumaki clans were two of the most powerful in the world and one born of both clans also had the Kyuubi no Yoko sealed within him only guaranteed how powerful such a union would become. She knew the Sandame had lied to her clan for reasons other than his so-called prophecy. The Sandame would object to the transfer of such a potent instrument to a nation whose values are completely at odds with his own. Anything new to report? Mei asked with a sigh as she turned back to face Ao. Ao raised his eyebrows. None Mizukage. Sama, Hiruzen's Anbu have looked all over the village, but they cannot locate Naruto. He was in the clearing the last time we saw him, but there has not been hide nor hair of him leaving the area by any means. Not even Shunshin could do such a thing. Mei muttered a curse and peered out the window, but there had been nothing at all. They were unable to find him even when Ao and Chojuro were keeping watch over the Anbu to make sure that nobody attempted to conceal anything they had discovered. Since Naruto had no knowledge of his ancestry and the Namikaze clan was the only clan in Konoha with the scrolls and seals needed to train time. Space ninjutsu, it was impossible for him to know even the most basic time. Space seal. The only way that there could be no evidence of him leaving the area would be if he used a time. Space ninjutsu. As she reflected on what had happened, Mei started massaging her temples. She had seen her fiancé run to a training ground, fall by the little pond, and the pond, Mizukage. Sama, what are you do? Ao turned to face Mei as she hurried around and headed for the door. My fiancé was last seen in that training ground, there's a small pond there, Mei said, jerking her head in Ao's direction. Mizukage. Sama, if he is in that pond, then he is. Mei glared at him to silence him. Ao didn't need to hear any more because he already knew what Mei was thinking. I know Ao, but if he is dead, I will not leave his body in this village, who would defile his grave the moment that he has been buried. She yelled. She opened the door after turning around. Crash. Mei was about to leave the door when the ground shook so violently that she fell and collided with Chojuro, who was standing outside. Ao also fell, and as pieces of the ceiling fell, he had to leap out of the way. Chojuro was blushing at their previous positions when Mei got up from him. Chojuro and Ao followed, and as their eyes crossed the window, they widened in surprise. A blood-red, tinted black outline outlined a pillar of unholy purple light that was erupting into the sky. It was only visible for a brief moment before disappearing. Mei, Chojuro, and Ao gazed at the location of the pillar. It started exactly where we last saw Naruto. Wondering what in Kami's name had happened, the three hurriedly leapt out the window toward the pond. At the same moment, a man's figure came up on the shore from the lake's depths. His face was framed by two pure black bangs in his shoulder. Length, spiky hair, which was almost bleach blonde but tinted with black highlights. He had somewhat of a tan, but his skin was almost unnaturally pale. His clothes, which only included a pair of ripped and tattered orange sweatpants, barely covered his well-developed and well-built body. Small fragments of what looked like crystal were adhered to his body, and his skin had the subtle feel of arcane runes. He opened his eyes just enough to show off a set of amber eyes with a slit in the middle. After blinking a couple of times, he said, Sin. Seeker. with a dark smile that showed off his long canines and slightly sharpened teeth while his amber eyes glowed sinisterly. I like it. The man, Naruto Uzumaki, stumbled as he slowly started to stand up. Without a doubt, the transformation made his body feel a little different. After a few moments of trying his balance, he managed to stay upright, but then abruptly grabbed his head and exclaimed, "Aghh!" His mind was filled with memories that were not his, including battles across a desolate plain of war, opponents who were more evil than he was, and kingdoms that rose and fell over the ages. The pain of the memories made him feel as though he had been set on fire while being crushed by a huge mountain. He was able to process the memories of the two creatures who had offered him their power after the memories had finally stopped pouring in, and he panted as a throbbing light persisted. It was truly remarkable. The origin of the Biju themselves was contained in their memories, along with countless techniques, magics that would make ninjutsu seem like a toy for civilians, rituals, weapons, and the answers to a ton of questions. He couldn't help but chuckle at the thought that, despite his long-held belief that the Biju were the strongest beings on the planet, they were actually no match for even the weakest of these highborn. He looked in the direction where he sensed the disturbance after suddenly sensing a change in the aura surrounding him. He could feel a number of people moving toward him, but he had no idea why. He had to get away because, despite his newfound strength, he knew he couldn't repel whoever was approaching without the knowledge to use it. His mind was suddenly filled with pictures, a means of escape. His upper torso was protected by energy flowing towards his lower body, and as he passed through it, the air split apart. Naruto swiftly followed the image's instructions without question. He pumped energy into his legs, covered his upper body, and then leapt through the trees in the opposite direction of the alleged enemy's approach. Chojuro, Ao, and Mei landed in the clearing, gasping for air and scanning their surroundings. Mizukage. Sama, there are several Anbu and Jonin coming this way. If they find us here, Ao said, turning to face the Mizukage. They will not, Mei said, pointing up at the trees. Look there. When Ao looked closely, he was astounded to see that the leaves appeared to have been poisoned by high doses of Yuki. He had witnessed such events when Yagura, the former Mizukage, used the power of the Sanbi. What are your orders, Mizukage? Sama, Chojuro asked, turning to face Mei. As Ao and Chojuro followed, Mei turned to face Chojuro and said, we follow the trail. There is only one person in this village who has the capability to wield Yuki, my fiancé. She then leapt swiftly into the trees. Mei flicked her wrist as they were leaving, and the Yuki poison leaves started to fall apart as though acid had been poured on them, leaving no trace for the Jonin and Anbu to follow. Alongside Naruto. In an attempt to distance himself from the energy signatures as much as possible, Naruto leapt through the forest's trees. He fled his assailants by crashing through the tree branches and breaking tree limbs as he landed on them. Naruto should have realized that memories of such ancient creatures could not be ingrained in his mind in a single viewing, but he stumbled abruptly as his head was struck by another flash of memories of the highborn. He started running again as his head ached, but he was getting exhausted very fast from the pain of the flashbacks and the unexpected new skills he had. Since he was now learning the name of his Yuki from the memories, he decided to save energy and stopped flooding his body with it. As he searched for a hiding spot, he saw a fence close by and the words, "Forbidden," written all over the place. Under normal circumstances, he would want to avoid it, but at the moment, he had to do it to survive. Swiftly running to the fence, Naruto vaulted over it before making his way farther into the forbidden area. Meanwhile, Mei, Ao, and Chojuro were concentrating on tracking down the Yuki trail that Naruto had left behind. Mei yelled angrily, "What do you mean there is no more Yuki to follow?" As they finally came to a halt. I mean there is no more Yuki poisoning of any plants or soil. This is the last spot." Mei pointed to the poisoned soil, and Ao shuddered. A furious Mei was never a good thing. Mei stared at the Yuki poisoning, inhaled deeply, and then let out a scream, a flaming ball of fire erupting from her mouth. Mei rarely lost her temper like this, but when she did, she frequently did more damage than she intended. Ao and Chojuro shielded themselves as Mei let loose her flames. Ao was going to advise them to try to stick to the usual course, but this will only make Mei even more irate. As her subordinates followed, Mei turned and started to leave after glancing at Ao and Chojuro. "Come, we must find my fiancé before the Anbu and Jonin start trying to blame him for whatever happened back there and end up getting him executed by the council." Alongside Naruto as he staggered through the trees, Naruto's head ached from the increasing number of memories that were flooding his mind. He kept seeing visions of warriors who were similar to these highborn, generations, kami, yamami, fallen monsters, and more. Eventually, he collapsed to his knees. His body shut down completely as he went into a deep sleep, the memories still fading through his mind, though he was unsure if this was his own choice or if his body did it unconsciously. The mindscape his mind was a shambles, a sewer, with brackish water coursing through the tunnels as more water was released into the terrible mental landscape by rusted or broken pipes. However, like a tsunami over a beach, a dark energy, a malevolent purple outlined with a black outline tinted blood red, swept across the mindscape. The dark energy caused the walls to collapse, changing its shape to one that was more appropriate. Storm clouds rose and brought down crimson and black lightning, the sewer walls collapsed, and a crimson sun now lit up the dark sky while 3 moons hovered overhead. The terrain was one of broken citadels, jagged mountains, and fractured terrain as the ground rose and fell. The water turned clear and grew into a large lake that was connected to by numerous smaller rivers. 3 gates appeared in the front of a huge temple that tore from the landscape in the very center. 2 of the gates were unlocked, but the third was chained shut by energies even stronger than Naruto's. The following day Naruto's eyes opened, and he let out a painful groan as he noticed a slight ache in his head. "Damn, what in the name of Makai hit me?" he said, sitting up and holding his head. "Well, what? Makai, where did that come from?" Naruto asked, scratching his still throbbing head. He shook his head, indicating that it was probably nothing. He cursed as he slowly got to his feet and surveyed the surroundings, the terrain, the geography, etc. Well, what? This was starting to get strange. Yes, he concealed his intelligence from Konoha, but he knew very little about geography or topography. He was only able to label the majority of the village's locations because he had to spend the majority of his childhood running from stray mobs or playing practical jokes on those who made his life more difficult and required escape routes. However, that was inside a village, not a wilderness he had never been in before. What in the name of Yami? Sama has happened to me. Wait, Yami. Sama, he said, grabbing his head once more. Why was he suddenly using and comprehending ideas that he had never been able to grasp in his entire life? And what was the reason behind all these new words that he had never used before? How could there have been such a drastic change in his brain? Then he realized that the highborn from earlier must have affected him more than he first believed because of their merging souls and power. It affected his way of thinking as well as his body, memories, and chakra network. Now that he thinks about it, it was a significant improvement. He recalled how the Sandaime had taught him to give the evil a second chance, forgive all who do you wrong, and that the will of fire burns within all people of the leaf. We must spread the mighty flames through a gentle voice of peace. The thought of those idealistic words that the foolish Sandaime had forced on him made him feel ill. That was another thing. He was now publicly expressing his disgust with people, as though he didn't give a damn about what they thought of him. Konohamaru was a pampered, conceited brat. Hinata was a creepy stalker, and Tucci was adamant about visiting Ichiraku as much as he could, but he seemed to try to avoid talking to him. Naruto was unsure of how to interpret all of this, but he has learned one crucial lesson throughout his life: never question a gift. He sighed as he examined his body, which had been improved by the union of the 2 highborn's souls. According to his understanding, he had developed into one of the highborn's most powerful races. However, he was probably no more strong than a Chunin. Naruto couldn't help but frown at the fact that despite his great power, he knew so little about how to use it that it was completely pointless. As the saying goes, the warrior brandishing the weapon is more important than the weapon itself. However, based on his understanding, this issue could be resolved with ease. For example, when he managed to elude his assailants the previous day, it appeared as though his mind would constantly flash pictures of the steps he needed to take in order to execute a particular technique. He obviously needed to practice using those images if he wanted to be truly powerful, but hey, nobody ever became powerful without practice. Naruto pivoted on his heel and surveyed the surroundings. There was probably a small clearing in the direction he was facing if what his mind was telling him was accurate. The slight change in the elevation of the grounds, the incline the trees were going, and the slowly dwindling number of trees as they went in a specific direction. In order to train, Naruto moved toward the field with more energy and prayed to Yami Sama that a Konoha.nin wouldn't find him. In the meantime, Mei Terumi was on the verge of wreaking havoc on the Konoha village. She had been looking everywhere for her fiancé, both inside and outside the village, but she had found nothing at all that would indicate where he was or is. In an attempt to find something she didn't carelessly destroy in her fit of rage, she looked in places he frequently visited, where he lived, and even followed the path of the Yuki poison leaves. Even worse, she had made a completely pointless attempt to locate anyone who would be willing to assist her in finding Naruto. The same thing happened with the shinobi, although the vast majority of them simply believed that since he was the dead last in the academy, he was not worth searching for, as he would not be useful as a shinobi in any way. Whenever she asked civilians if they had seen Naruto recently, they would spout some demon hating nonsense until Mei silenced them with either killing intent or a good kick to the lungs. After searching the Konoha forests for a while, Mei felt the need to take a break. She sat against a tree and tried to process all of the information she had found. Despite searching every inch of Konoha, from the clan district to the red light district, as well as his apartment and regular hangouts, she was unable to locate him. Damn you, Hiruzen, had you not lied to me and my clan in the first place, this never would have happened. She slammed her fist into the ground in rage as she prepared to get up and go. She felt the distinct spike of Yuki and her blood suddenly went cold, sending a deadly chill up her spine. She turned to face herself, and based on the sensation, she could tell that the energy was coming from behind her. She hurried to her feet and ran as fast as she could, toward the source of the energy. She let hope into her heart for the first time in years. Hope that her fiancé survived. Hope that she would finally be able to start a family of her own. For a brief moment, the energy surged. Mei continued to move forward until she noticed the trees ahead of her begin to catch fire. Then, with the last of her remaining speed, she ducked to the side to avoid a Yuki bolt that would have ripped right through her. Because of the scare, Mei paused for a moment, panting, adrenaline pumping through her body, until she abruptly began to feel a burning sensation on the side of her arm. She was astounded by what she saw when she looked down. She managed to avoid it by a few feet, but the energy from that Yuki bolt was so strong that she still received a small dose of Yuki and was now experiencing Yuki poisoning. She became confused at this point because neither Jinchuriki nor even Biju's Yuki are strong enough to cause such an event. She would have to be directly touched by the Yuki to get Yuki poisoning in the first place, but even after avoiding a tiny bolt of Yuki, so little that she was unaware of it until the trees began to burn, she was still poisoned by Yuki, even though it had only touched the surface of her skin. This was not something a Jinchuriki or even a Biju could do. All she was certain of was that whoever she was going to couldn't possibly be her fiancé. She was on the verge of running away, but something inside of her restrained her and urged her to keep going. She didn't know why she listened to this aspect of herself, but she followed its instructions and kept moving toward the Yuki. She didn't have to go far because she discovered the origin of the Yuki spikes after only 50 yards. She saw one of the most attractive people she had ever seen in the middle of a training field. No muscle was too big or too small on his well-built body, which appeared to have been carved by skilled artisans out of granite. His only clothing item was a pair of torn orange pants that didn't fit him well. Despite being abnormally pale, there were areas of his skin that appeared tanner than the others. He must have noticed her presence because he turned his head, displaying his remaining features. He framed his perfectly angled face with two pitch black bangs and bleach blonde hair that was shoulder length with a few black highlights. He had deep amber eyes that seemed to sparkle in the sunlight. Additionally, Mei observed that there appeared to be faint rune-like textures scattered across his body. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" the figure asked, scowling and assuming a fighting stance as he gazed at her. For some reason, Mei felt comfortable around this man, even though she was broken from staring at him while he spoke. Oh, I am sorry. I felt a spike of Yuki and what?" the man asked, holding up his arm. Her eyes widened in shock as she said, I thought that my fiancé might be here." She had not felt helpless in this man's presence, even when Yagura had unleashed his Biju when they had invaded Kirigakure. Why had she told him that? Why couldn't she just tell the lie she'd wanted to tell? With an eyebrow raise, the figure asked, "Why would you think that?" Mei's eyes popped open once more as she said, my fiancé is a Jinchuriki. For all these years I had thought him dead, when in truth the Sandame had lied to me. What was wrong with her? She saw that the figure's eyes had slightly widened as she looked up at him, but why? "What was your fiancé's name?" the figure asked, shaking his head as he moved slightly out of his stance. "Naruto Uzumaki." Mei scowled and wanted to reassure him that it was none of his business, but she simply blurted out the response as usual. The figure asked, "Did you just say Naruto Uzumaki?" as its eyes widened once more. Mei gave the man a fierce glare and shook her head. Even though it was something she didn't want him to know, there was something about this man that made her talk without thinking. Taking a combat stance, she asked, "Why, what does it matter to you?" "Because miss, I am he." She watched as the man, who had previously been in a fighting stance, poised to attack, stood up straight and gazed at her questioningly. As Naruto spoke, the wind seemed to silence itself and the air seemed to grow still. Time seemed to stop, birds stopped chirping, and the hum of Konoha's insects that were fluttering through the air stopped. The entire universe seemed to be watching, anticipating Mei Terumi's reaction. What did you just say?" Mei asked, her lips quivering as her body shook and her eyes widened to the point where they shouldn't have been able to stay in their sockets. "I have answered your question. Now I must ask, what in Yami's name do you mean when you say that I am your fiancé? Naruto said again, his face still stoic and impassive. I am Naruto Uzumaki. He did not waste any breath and his eyes narrowed slightly at the woman in interest. Mei didn't even move to indicate that she heard his question, instead, she was staring at Naruto and soaking up his form. This man, this Adonis, claimed to be her long-thought, deceased fiancé, Naruto Uzumaki. How is that possible? She had recently seen her fiancé. He had cerulean blue eyes, spiky blonde hair, an orange jumpsuit, and pale tan skin that framed his smaller than average frame. The man she was staring at was tall, strong, and muscular. His body was bare except for the tattered orange sweatpants that barely covered his eyes, and his eyes were not her fiancé's. They were amber in color, with a slit in place of a normally round pupil. His hair was bleach blonde and streaked with shades of black, and he had two pure onyx black bangs framing his features. At that moment, Mei's thoughts stopped, and she looked at his pants. Her eyes widened significantly as she looked more closely. The pants this man wore were in ruined shape, but Mei knew they were the same pants her fiancé had worn a few days prior. As she looked over his form, she thought, it can't be. This can't possibly be him. Well, he looked at her expectantly, his face impassive, and Mei's eyes shot back up to meet his. What? She stammered and shook her head. Naruto looked up and replied, you have yet to answer my question despite my answering of yours. What exactly did you mean when you said I was your fiancé? We were engaged many years ago by our respective parents, before you were born, we were supposed to marry Mei's eyes widened as she processed the question, and before she could even process what she wanted to say, her body seemed to react on its own. Seeing Naruto's reaction, Mei's words seemed to die in her throat. After a brief moment of widening, Naruto's eyes narrowed again and he said, our respective parents. He turned to face her and started to approach her. Mei didn't know why, but as this man, her fiancé, walked toward her, she felt totally immobilized. She merely gazed at him as he drew nearer to her. Her heart pounded as the gap between them dwindled quickly. Who were my parents? Mei jumped when she realized that Naruto was no longer even a foot ahead of her. He had been so close that she had not even realized it. It took several moments for her to lower her pulse and catch her breath. You said, our respective parents, so again I ask you, who were my parents? Naruto asked, his tone a little sharp, as he gazed expectantly at her. Mei took a breath and said, why? Your father was Minato Namikaze, the Undaime Hokage of Konoha, and your mother was Kushina Uzumaki, a native of Uzu no Kuni. After a few moments of staring at her, Naruto scowled and turned to face the center of the training field. Mei glanced in his direction and blinked a few times. Naruto's face, meanwhile, conveyed a profound sense of contemplation as he gave the new information time to register. This woman claims that their parents, his parents, had arranged for the two to get married before he was even born. He had believed for years that his parents were unimportant and that he was just an orphan without a name, but it turned out that he was actually the child of Minato Namikaze, Undaime Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato, the same man who had initially sealed the Kyuubi inside of him. He would have erupted in tears at the thought of it from his old mind, his mind as a mere ninja, and he would have questioned why he had been kept in the dark and why he had lived the way he did. But it was easy to see how the facts seemed to fit together because he was now a magnificent new person who was very different from who he had been before. Although it is true that Minato Namikaze was not the only person with blonde hair and blue eyes in Konoha, he did exhibit some of the characteristics that were genuinely unique to him. He had similar, toned blonde hair, a similar pattern of spiky locks, and even a somewhat similar eye color. There were enough physical indicators to indicate that they were at least somewhat related, even though he had his own share of physical differences, such as round cheeks and whisker marks. Something he ought to have known long ago. More proof that my ascension is more beneficial than being a ninja could ever be, he thought, scoffing a little. Are you alright? Mei said as she decided to approach at that precise moment. When he heard her question, Naruto blinked and turned to face her. He couldn't resist letting a contemplative frown appear on his face before he said, yes. He then turned to face her. The two of them stood silently for what felt like several minutes, Mei's posture appearing strained, almost intolerably rigid, while Naruto's stood in a pose that conveyed complete calm. Naruto could tell right away that she was keeping something from him. Her posture and stance told him that she wanted to ask him a question or say something to him. Naruto, Mei swallowed as she started to speak. Yes? Asked Naruto, quirking an eye, wondering what she was going to say. Naruto, D.Do you understand why I called you my fiancé? Mei swallowed again as she forced herself to speak, shivering at the intimacy while she studied Naruto. Why did he appear this way? The man she had seen yesterday was very different from the person she had known. In what way had he changed? She was aware that she ought to ask him these questions directly, but the fact that her fiancé, whom she had long believed to be dead, was still alive and well troubled her. Her mind was racing with ideas of marrying her true love, becoming a wife to the person she had spent months preparing to be, and finally starting a family of her own. After examining her and considering her query, Naruto said, "Yes, I understand why you called me your fiancé." For the first time in more than 10 years, Mei's eyes appeared to sparkle with hope. Her heart seemed to be racing, and she seemed to be filled with joy. However, I must reject the arranged marriage. Mei's heart broke as she was overcome with hopelessness. But why am I not? Naruto cut her off before she could begin her despaired rambling. I reject the arranged marriage because of the facts surrounding it. Firstly, this arrangement was set up before I was even born, therefore this would have forced me from birth to marry a woman that my parents had chosen for me, thus removing any chance of me ever making my own choices. The second part of my reasoning is because this marriage is undoubtedly a political ploy by both our parents, either to unify an alliance or as some overall plot for either side. Either way, one or both of us would have simply been pawns of our respective parents, and I absolutely refuse to be a pawn. Thirdly, I do not know anything about you, and I refuse to be forcibly married to somebody I know nothing about just because my long-deceased parents arranged something concerning me before I was ever even brought into this world. Naruto looked at Mei with a stoic face. There are plenty of other reasons why I will not abide by the arranged marriage, but those 3 should be more than enough for you. He turned away and began to walk out of the training grounds to find another location to train. Mei, meanwhile, was in shock, and if one looked closely, the corners of her eyes had a thin layer of tears on them. She was not a fool. She was aware that Naruto's parents and her own had planned this arranged marriage, but she did not care because she had a strong desire to be with Naruto. In fact, it seemed as though her life's work was to be with him. She had a thought as she felt more sadness seeping into her heart, and a tiny glimmer of hope appeared in her eyes. Naruto was on the verge of leaving the training area. Wait. He was about to leave the area when Mei called out to him, and he stopped as she rushed, almost frantically, towards him. Panting a little, she halted directly in front of him and said, "Naruto, I understand your desire to reject the arranged marriage, but please, allow me to fulfill some use to you." "What do you mean?" asked Naruto, raising an eyebrow. Mei raised her voice, "Naruto, I am the Godem Mizukage of Kirigakure. I have fought and defeated Yagura, the Yondaime Mizukage of Kirigakure, and Jinchuriki of the Sanbi. I could be a valuable asset as a teacher." After a few moments of silence and stoicism, Naruto said, "You wish to teach me?" Mei raised her eyebrows. "Yes, I am sure you already have a teacher, but surely there are things your teacher cannot possibly teach you, things I could grant you knowledge of, things I could teach you in, things your teacher could never hope to grant you in terms of knowledge." Naruto scowled. He had no instructor, but Mei's lack of knowledge was largely justified. For a few moments, Naruto considered her offer. As he didn't really need human techniques, but she was right about one thing. There were things he could learn from her that would help him speed up his own training and gain strength more quickly. Although it was less effective than receiving training from other members of his kind, he had no choice because, despite his age, he was still young for his kind, and he would have to be a fool to turn down Akage's offer of training. Naruto nodded his head and sighed, saying, "Very well, if you desire so, I will allow you to train me." Mei's eyes brightened, and she couldn't resist smiling. Really?" she exclaimed. Naruto gave a nod of approval. Mei appeared to tremble expectantly, exclaiming, "Oh thank you," with a loud smile and an excited stance and tone. "Trust me, you will not regret this." She lets her giddiness take over her for a few minutes before gradually calming down. I need to prepare a few things before we begin training though. Could we meet here tomorrow, sunrise?" Mei said, coughing after a few minutes and turning to face Naruto. With a slightly raised eyebrow, Naruto gazed at her. Since it was sunrise tomorrow, he honestly thought she would want to start training immediately. What could she possibly need to get ready for? Nodding his head, Naruto said, "Very well, sunrise tomorrow then." Mei grinned and bowed slightly before saying, "Until sunrise then." She turned slowly and hurried out of the field. Naruto let out a sigh and turned back to face the training field after she had finally disappeared from his view. There was no reason he couldn't continue training right now, even if he did have training with Mei planned for tomorrow. To continue his training, he started to move toward the middle of the field. He felt a faint pulse coming from his navel when he abruptly stopped in the middle of a step and turned to face his abdomen. Chambers of the Council 3 levels comprised the Konohagakure Council. As issues were brought to the stand, the Hokage and his advisors, who served as the presiding members, were in charge of deciding who could and could not speak. The heads of the various shinobi divisions, including interrogation, Anbu, medic. Nincore, and even the head of the Shinobi Corps seduction branch, were present at the second tier. They each represented a distinct shinobi division. The various clan heads, who represented their clan's interests because most shinobi were supplied by the various clans, made up the third tier. In Konoha, there was an additional tier that included the heads of civilian interests, wealthy merchants, heads of civilian families, and various nobles and political figures. Normally, this would be the only tier required. The Konohagakure Council was typically only convened during extremely significant occasions, and this meeting's topic was no exception. The Sandame's choice to let Kirigakure's Godem Mizukage roam around Konoha and do as she pleases. The Sandame's advisor, Homura, exclaimed, "This is an outrage. A foreign leader is waltzing around our village, dictating orders to our Anbu, and all under your approval." Although not everyone agreed, Homura's monologue was greeted with applause and shouts of support. Ibiki Morino, the head of the interrogation division, yelled, "How dare you? You dare to order our Hokage, your superior, around? If Sandame Sama has decided to let her move as she pleases, then you have no authority to tell him otherwise." Many yelled in support of him and his choice to support the Hokage. Few people were silent, but Inoichi Yamanaka spoke up, her sternness resonating outside. "He is allowing a foreign leader to dictate our troops, regardless of whether it is his decision or not. It shows a lack of forethought when our leader allows another to do as they please," she said. The Sandame himself eventually had enough and yelled, "Silence!" with the intention of killing the council's more outspoken members in order to get their full attention. "This petty squabbling over this matter has gone on long enough. This council is meant to advise me, not dictate my leadership," he said. With Hiruzen's intent to kill, a large portion of the council flinched and bowed their heads. HMPH. Danzo, his oldest rival, Hiruzen Sarutobi's secondary advisor, and the former commander of Enbu Unit NE, was not so easy to frighten. Danzo was an elderly man with half of his face bandaged and one arm in a sling. "Leadership. I hardly call your rule leadership, Hiruzen. Regardless of your position, the fact you allowed a foreign leader free reign here, especially a foreign leader from Kiri of all places, makes us all question your state of mind, given that particular nation's history." Danzo turned to face Hiruzen, who was wearing a combat robe and carrying a cane in one hand, suggesting a heavy limp. "Along with your history with the Terumi clan itself. It was well known that the foreign leader Hiruzen gave unrestricted authority to was the final living member of the Terumi clan, and Danzo's words sent a reverberation through the council chambers. Only a small number were aware of Hiruzen's close ties to the Terumi clan. Danzo was obviously trying to take advantage of the fact that he was one of the few people who did know. The council whispered to themselves as they turned to face the Sandame, "Oh, it seems that our dear Hokage has been keeping secrets from this council." Danzo appeared to smirk as he looked around. "You see, honorable council, our Hokage was friends with a member of the Terumi clan when it was still a noble family of Kirigakure, before the bloodline purges incited by the Yondaime Mizukage of Kirigakure." Hiruzen remained apathetic, but anyone familiar with nervous tics could see that the Sandame was gradually growing impatient. "In fact, the current Mizukage, the one our dear Sandame has let run around, doing as she pleases," Danzo said, smirking briefly before he became stoic. He turned to face Sandame and said, "Is the granddaughter of the one he once called friend." Every council member stared at Hiruzen with varying degrees of shock, rage, and hatred on their faces, and there was silence in the council chambers. At last, his former teammate Homura got to his feet and said, "Hiruzen, is this true?" with a tone of hate in his voice. The other members of the council looked expectantly at Hiruzen as they waited for his answer. Hiruzen closed his eyes and took a slow breath. Abruptly, the room was filled with the most ferocious desire to kill that none of the council had experienced in years. The sheer force of the killing intent knocked the wind out of Homura, who gasped and had to sit back, clutching his chest. As this was going on, Hiruzen opened his eyes slowly and glared at Homura, saying, "No matter our past friendships, Counselor Homura, you will refer to me only as Hokage Sama." Hiruzen then turned his gaze to Danzo and said, "And you?" As Hiruzen's murderous intent pierced him like 1,000 white-hot knives, Danzo tightened his hold on his seat. The council flinched as Hiruzen slowly rose to his feet, snarling as his glare hardened. "You dare presume to supersede my authority, revealing secrets to this council to try to make them turn against me, their Hokage, their superior, and yours." Hiruzen snapped angrily, and then glared at them, saying, "What I do benefits the village as a whole. After all these years, every last one of you should know that by now." Hiruzen glared back at Danzo, who was still shaking, and said, "As for the reasons why I am allowing Mei Terumi to have free reign in our village, had any of you bothered to ask me why I was allowing a foreign leader to have free reign in our village, as opposed to making wild accusations and ridiculous demands, I would have been more than happy to oblige an answer." Knowing that the Sandame's statement was accurate, the council bowed their heads. Since calling the meeting, they had only made demands and made lurid accusations against the Sandame, never once questioning why he had permitted a foreign leader to govern their village. Sandame. Sama, forgive me, but why have you allowed the Godem Mizukage to have free reign of Konohagakure, a village you are in command of? Ibiki said, scowling at his fellow council members. Ibiki was given forgiveness by Hiruzen, who turned to face the council. Now, as to why I have allowed the Godem Mizukage to roam freely in our village, is because so long as I allow her to do so, she will not unleash her wrath upon us, he said. At this fact, the council muttered, but some yelled in indignation. Her wrath? Konohagakure is the strongest of all the hidden villages. What possible threat could she pose to us? Exclaimed a fat merchant, whose conceit was even more repulsive than his foul odor. The point is valid, Hiruzen. Our shinobi may have become lax over the years, but as a whole we are far superior to any of the other nations. Against all of Konoha, what possible threat could she pose to us? Danzo said after a few others raised their voices. You wish to know what possible threat the Godem Mizukage could pose to us? What possible threat could the strongest shinobi of one of the 5 great hidden villages do? Especially when the Godem is a Terumi, a clan as legendary and feared as the Uchiha and Senju clans. Hiruzen, who was rapidly growing impatient, shot Danzo multiple bolts of killing intent, forcing him to sit back in silence. The Sandame's description of the Godem made the council tremble, and although they all still brashly thought they were strong enough to defeat any enemy, they started to doubt themselves despite their conceit. Hiruzen turned to the council. I will tell you what threat she poses. I had several Anbu guarding me when she entered my office just hours after she entered our village, and each of these Anbu were the best and brightest of our corps, truly elites among our elites. He looked at the commander of the Anbu. She did not even move, when she used her skills over her Kekkei Genkai to turn all of them into a bubbling puddle of flesh and bile. The council was in complete shock after the Mizukage defeated their top Anbu, and she did not even flinch. The Anbu commander, who had personally selected each and every Anbu member to serve as the Sandame's personal guard, was shocked to learn how easily they had been killed. They got up and said, surely the Mizukage had to have made some sort of movement, hand signs, lip movements, anything? They were hoping for some kind of information because they thought that by identifying a hand sign or lip movement, they might be able to come up with a way to somehow counter the Mizukage's tactics. The only sign she had unleashed her jutsu was a single burst of chakra, and she showed no fatigue from doing the technique at all, Hiruzen said, turning to face the Anbu commander. Many members of the council were frightened by this. It was inhuman to use such a horrible technique and not be worn out by it. Hiruzen glanced at them. With that power at her control, she could easily kill many of our finest soldiers, and should we make a move against her, no doubt all of Kirigakure will unleash their wrath upon us. I refuse to be responsible for starting the 4th Shinobi World War. He glanced around at the councilors. Now, unless there is anything else you feel requires further wasting of my precious and limited time, I call this meeting adjourned. He started standing in order to leave. Actually, Sandame. Sama, there is one matter I wish to bring forth. Hiruzen paused and looked at a particularly attractive woman, with soft makeup applied to her features, an elaborate kimono, and long brown hair styled in a traditional bow. Her shoulders were partially exposed, and her kimono was gently parted to display her ample cleavage. He didn't know her name, but he knew her well. After all, she was the head of the seduction corps. What is it? Hiruzen asked, coughing and glancing at her while concealing a slight flush. The woman addressed him directly. While I share the rest of the council's concerns in having a foreign leader doing as they please, I will respect your decision, for this provides ample opportunity for Konohagakure herself. What are you talking about, you troublesome woman? Shikaku Nara said, yawning. The head of the seduction corps said, Sandame. Sama, what was the civil war in Kirigakure fought over? As if ignoring Shikaku. Hiruzen stared in disbelief at this question. Kekkei Genkai. The Yondaime Mizukage desired the death of all Kekkei Genkai holders, and unleashed a bloodline purge, killing anyone with a Kekkei Genkai purely on principle. There was a faction within Kiri who disagreed with the Yondaime, thus leading to the bloodline civil war. The lady laughed. Correct. And what is the Terumi clan most known for besides their sheer prowess in combat? Their Kekkei Genkai. Hiruzen blinked, his eyes slightly widening as he started to understand her direction. She grinned. Yes, the Terumi clan was known for their powerful Kekkei Genkai along with their sheer battle prowess. so no doubt the Yondaime would not have ever considered allowing any of them to live. However, the Yondaime Mizukage is dead, the civil war won by the opposing faction, and their leader is a Terumi. "What are you getting at?" said Choza. The woman grinned and stood up to address the entire council. The Yondaime Mizukage desired the destruction of all Kekkei Genkai within his lands, and he was opposed by a faction who did not want to eradicate the bloodlines of their nation. Now, the Yondaime Mizukage is dead, and once again, Kekkei Genkai wielders are safe, and can rebuild their clans to their former glory. However, they are no doubt few in number because of the purges, which gives us a great advantage. "Oh, stop speaking and get to the point, you loose bitch," growled Sume Inuzuka. "You're one to talk, you sluttish mongrel. Do your kids know how easy their mother really is?" the woman said, smirking menacingly as she glared at Sume. It growled Sume, "Why you?" "Enough!" the Sandame yelled, glaring at Sume and the other woman before turning back to face her and asking, "What did you have in mind?" The woman laughed, "I am so glad you asked, Sandame Sama." She coughed and said, "Due to the low numbers of the bloodline clans, they have a limited chance of rebuilding themselves. It will take many years for them to return to their full state, and no doubt they are not as well protected as they should be due to the entire land having to be rebuilt from the civil war, which leaves them vulnerable. I suggest that we send our forces out to kidnap several bloodline clan members, or in my division's case, seduce several bloodline holders, and then kill them. This will give our village an opportunity to obtain whatever bloodlines Kiri has left, and in turn, deprive them of their own bloodlines, increasing our strength by decreasing theirs. And since the Mizukage is here in Konoha, they will be that much more vulnerable." As the council discussed the proposal and exchanged glances, they all agreed that it was a good idea. It was actually ideal. If they had taken Kiri's bloodlines while the Mizukage was present, Kirigakir's strength would have decreased while their own would have increased. "How do you propose we begin?" Hiruzen asked, closing his eyes and taking a few breaths before opening them. "I am sure this should suffice, my lord." The woman grinned and reached into her kimono, revealing more of her ample bosom, and took out a file. She then slid the file across the table in Hiruzen's direction. Hiruzen glanced at the file before quickly but carefully grabbing it. He opened the file slowly and looked at the first page. The woman only needed to see the glint in his eye for her features to light up with a smile. In the meantime, Chojuro and Ao were waiting for their Mizukage to return while they sat in the apartment they had rented while visiting Konoha. After searching the village for Naruto once more, they had just arrived back at the apartment. Several Konoha residents had harassed them during their search, and the situation nearly turned violent, but the shinobi under Hiruzen's command had essentially threatened to kill the people if they attempted anything. They were aware of Hiruzen's attempts to influence Mei, Ao, and Chojuro's perceptions of Konoha, but they were able to see through his deceit and lies. The two were becoming anxious as they sat in the apartment because their Mizukage had not yet returned and she had been gone for several hours following the incident near the pond the day before. Even though they were aware of their leader's strength, it was still risky to be in enemy territory without support. Chojuro rose in protest as Ao finally had enough and got up, saying, "That is it, I am going out to locate her." He then made his way to the door. "But Mizukage Sama ordered us to remain here in case." As he started to open the door, he continued to look at Chojuro and yelled, "I refuse to sit here while my leader is out in enemy territory by herself." Hard as it may be for you to understand, Chojuro, sometimes you have to disobey orders to do what is best for your leaders. Is that a fact, Ao? Hearing his leader's sharp, flat voice made Ao's blood run cold. He started to slowly turn his head and saw Mei Terumi staring at him with anticipation. Mei's hard eyes seemed to pierce Ao's soul, causing him to tremble. Mizukage Sama, I. Mei pushed past him and silenced him, saying, "Consider yourself lucky I am in a good mood, Ao." She then went to her bags and started going through them as though she was searching for something. "Mizukage Sama, we are so grateful that you have returned well and unharmed." Chojuro stood and bowed as Ao slowly closed the door. Mei didn't even realize Chojuro was there because she was too preoccupied with finding her. One scroll after another was pushed aside by Mei, who then grinned and said, "Ah, here we are." She produced a small scroll that was covered in seals that appeared to form a lock-like shape. "Chojuro." She scowled as she turned around and saw that Chojuro was still bowing. Mizukage Sama, I. Chojuro bounded up, but Mei ignored him and pushed past him as she made her way to the desk nearby. After a few moments of staring at the desk, she picked up a stray quill that was resting on the edge. After examining it, she chewed on the tip a little before pressing the quill into her palm until the entire point was inside. With his eyes wide with surprise, Ao exclaimed, "Mizukage Sama," and rushed forward in reaction to Mei's actions. Mei yelled, "Pay it no mind, Ao." She then withdrew the quill, which was now smeared with blood, from her grasp. She then turned to face the scroll she was holding and quickly started writing on the blank areas of it with the quill. Mei used her blood-soaked quill to draw on the scroll while Ao and Chojuro watched. At last, Chojuro decided to say, Mizukage. Sama, I. Mei yelled, Chojuro, go and grab one of the parchments from the bag. Confused, Chojuro blinked, Mizukage.sam. Now, Mei snapped at him, turning her head and glaring. Chojuro almost jumped out of his skin. Why? Yes, Mizukage. Sama. He exclaimed in terror before running to the bag and searching through it for the parchment. Mei persisted in writing the seals on the scroll until, at last, she completed a twisted swirl and, using a single motion, pressed her still bleeding finger at a seal junction, Kai. The still watching Ao was both shocked and astounded by what transpired next. The symbols Mei had written on the scroll were burned into the scroll itself when her blood ignited on it. The page appeared to shift as the burns cooled. Looking more closely, Ao saw that it was the symbols themselves that were shifting, peeling off the page and floating just off the scroll's surface. He watched in awe as the symbols started to swirl and change, floating all over the scroll's surface and forming new patterns and layers. Ao had never seen anything like what he was seeing now in all his years, so he watched in amazement and shock as the symbols continued to move around. Mei pressed her thumb against the newly created Fuan design, seemingly unaffected by it. For a brief moment, the pattern wavered before adhering to the scroll and then disappearing entirely. Once adorned with designs resembling locks, the scroll now displayed symbols that revealed an open lock. Mei quickly unrolled the scroll and started looking through its contents. Chojuro came back at that precise moment with multiple pieces of parchment in his hands. Mizukage. Sama. I have the parchments you request. Chojuro jumped back as Mei grabbed the parchments out of his hands. Without saying a word, Mei set the scroll she was reading aside while she arranged the parchments, opened the drawer that contained multiple ink vials, removed several vials, wiped her quill inside the first vial, and then turned back to the scroll as she started writing objectively on the parchment. Chojuro's head bowed glumly, as if he had been shocked. Upon seeing this, Ao scowled and turned to face Mei, saying, Mizukage, Sama. Before continuing to write on the parchment, Mei paused her writing as she unfolded the scroll further, exposing an increasing number of writings. With a sigh, Ao turned to face Chojuro and said, Chojuro, go get some rest. Normally, Chojuro would object, stating that he had to be there to serve Mizukage, Sama, but he was too depressed to object and just nodded his head, saying, hi, before making his way to his sleeping quarters. While this was going on, Ao remained with Mei and observed her writing on the parchment with a vigor he had never seen in her before. Mei had only one thought as she gazed between the parchment and the scroll. Her fiancé, Naruto, and her hopes of winning his affection. Alongside Naruto with his gaze fixed on his abdomen, close to the spot where the pulse appeared to have come from, Naruto reached slowly for his abdomen and lightly traced the area, noticing a faint pattern as he followed the pulse's origins. Is that the... No, it couldn't be. Could it? He asked, his eyes narrowing as he saw the pattern. As he struggled to identify the pattern, he stumbled as visions of stances, hand signals, and his power pulses suddenly flashed through his mind once more. When the pictures finally stopped, he looked up and said, only one way to find out. Recalling the images that had flooded through his mind, Naruto took a deep breath and widened his stance, bending his knees while adjusting his feet to keep himself upright. He then held his hands out in front of him, adjusting the fingers to form a different hand sign, and then bringing them together to form a hand sign made up of the hand signs made by each of his individual hands. He inhaled deeply and started pulsing his energy at ostensibly random intervals, letting it circulate throughout his body. As he gradually repositioned his hands to make a new hand sign, he let out a slow breath. He gave one last burst of energy to finish. Naruto took a breath, let it out, and then slowly opened his eyes. As he looked at the mindscape, which appeared as a stunning yet terrifying landscape unlike anything the mortal world had ever seen, his eyes widened for a moment before returning to normal as he spoke. So, this is the mind of a highborn. So far. Tower of Hokage. While the Anbu commander stood to his right and the head of the Seduction Corps stood to his left, Hiruzen Sarutobi studied the papers in front of him. Hiruzen nodded his head as he read the last few pages, saying, this plan is sound, clear, concise. I see no room for error in this so long as everything goes according to plan. Hiruzen turned to face his Anbu commander and asked, should I approve this plan? Will there be any concerns of negligence of duty or inconsistencies in planning? As calm and watchful as ever, the Anbu commander bowed, saying, if you will this plan to be enacted, Then the Anbu core will die to ensure it is fulfilled to utmost perfection. Hokage Sama. Hiruzen turned to face the head of the seduction core and grinned gratifiedly, saying, "Good." He then said, "Report to my office as soon as possible. Resources must be acquired and diverted properly if this plan is to go underway without a single setback." The seduction corps leader grinned and said, "As you command, Hokage Sama." Her pupils dilating venomously, Sume Inuzuka could not help but snarl angrily in the woman's direction. However, a severe glare from Hiruzen silenced her, and she was left to brood in silence. As Sandaime Hokage of Konohagakure no Sato, I declare this council adjourned. Hiruzen sighed and turned to face the council. He took the papers in front of him and said, "You are all dismissed." At that point, each councillor got up and left the council chambers, going in their separate directions. All except the head of the Hyuga clan, Heishi Hyuga. Heishi had listened, observed, and measured the events that had happened and would happen as the council meeting went on, but he had remained silent the entire time. In no way, shape, or form was he happy with the outcome of the meeting. To be honest, he didn't care that the Mizukage had been granted unrestricted control over Konoha, that the Sandaime had been friends with the new Mizukage's grandfather, or that the Sandaime had displayed any leniency toward a foreign leader. Except, of course, when it involved his clan, but that wasn't here or there. No, it was Konoha's apparent obsession that irritated, no, infuriated, him. Genkai Keke, as a Hyuga, Heishi now held the view that people with bloodlines were superior to those without, making him a bloodline supremacist. However, few in Konoha understood that it was not the quantity of Keke Genkai but rather their quality, which was evident when one looked at the constantly deteriorating clans of Konohagakure. This blind obsession with obtaining every bloodline they could lay their hands on was nothing less than stupidity in its most basic form. For generations, brothers, sisters, cousins, even aunts, nieces, and nephews would produce children together, guaranteeing the next generation would be even stronger than the previous generation, strengthening the bloodline and the clan as a whole. However, many had forgotten that a clan's bloodlines were improved through a very sophisticated pedigree, breeding traits within the family and not allowing a single drop of outside blood entering the gene pool unless it was proven that allowing the interbreeding would improve the clan as a whole. With the establishment of Konohagakure no Sato, everything changed. They were initially helpful, providing money outside of the never-ending missions carried out by the clans, and even providing cannon fodder when clans became bold enough to attack Konoha directly. The village was first established by a pact between the Uchiha and Senju clans, and it was like a beacon where dozens of itinerant merchants, civilians, and the like gathered, seeking safety and shelter from the still burning flames of the clan wars. But eventually, what had once been great would be destroyed by their ignorance of the clans and their Keke Genkai. The clans must reproduce within their own gene pool, but they are unaware of this. In order to avoid a stagnant source of genes for each generation, civilians and those without bloodlines had long learned that reproduction within a gene pool would lead to negative outcomes. They had learned that lower levels of intelligence, reasoning, and thought, as well as some of the more extreme results of inbreeding within these groups, resulted in deformities and birth defects that ultimately proved fatal as a result of inbreeding. But civilians and those without bloodlines were unaware that Keke Genkai were more than just exotic genes, they were something else entirely. The best results for the next generation were often obtained in clans that held Keke Genkai by keeping the gene pool as closed as possible, preventing the entry of outside genes, and preventing interbreeding between clans. In fact, adding new genes may have been the biggest risk a bloodline could ever face because they cause the bloodline's traits to disappear from the gene pool. Naturally, neither the daimyo nor the civilians were prepared to accept this reality, considering the clan's propensity for inbreeding to be a scourge. As a result, they imposed their will on the clans. For those who could see it, the outcome was clear. The Kurama clan was a strong clan with a Keke Genkai that was as dangerous as the Senju's Mokuton, the Uchiha's Sharingan, and even rivaled the Hyuga's Byakugan. However, due to the daimyo, the Kurama clan had lost its name and its bloodline. In fact, the only person left with the bloodline was the clan heiress, who was born as a result of a drunken one-night stand between the clan head and his sister. The heiress had a long list of psychological problems that made her a threat rather than an asset, and the Sandaime would soon order her death to protect the village. Once a proud and honorable warrior clan, the Inuzuka had senses comparable to the most well-organized and resilient pack of wolves. Today, they are merely mongrels, snarling, frothing, uncouth mutts. Once possessing strong innate abilities, the Yamanaka, Nara, and Akamichi clans were now reduced to family techniques, the majority of which were useless unless they were able to regain the abilities that had vanished so long ago. Although the Uchiha clan made a concerted effort to maintain the clan's purity and to keep their powerful bloodline from going dormant forever, they ultimately gave in to the will of the daimyo. Previously, every Uchiha had the innate ability to activate their Sharingan at birth, with the Kekkei Genkei already awakened. However, due to village laws, this was infrequently possible before the age of 13, and by that time, only a small number of Uchiha had ever activated their Kekkei Genkei. However, no clan had fallen further from grace than the Senju clan, who had welcomed the daimyo and civilian method of breeding. Now, only one Senju remained. The others had all perished years ago, weak from successive civilians, and even then, the last Senju was a disgrace to their clan. A drunken gambler who was incapable of even using the elemental ninjutsu, a skill that had initially made her clan so notable. The Hyuga, however, had survived because they had kept their gene pool relatively pure through covert breeding programs inside their own walls, allowing each Hyuga to activate their Byakugan at an early age. The Hyuga had been following this exacting procedure since they were forced to join Konohagakure, and it had gone smoothly for years. But Heishi discovered the hard way that mistakes are inevitable. A daimyo who wanted to hire the Hyuga for a particular project had come to Konoha to speak to the Hyuga clan directly, and he had brought his daughter with him. The Hyuga were able to keep a proper pedigree among their clan, so their shinobi had remained at the top of the line, always vigilant and in a sense, perfect in all forms. The Hyuga clan would be ashamed of that night for years to come. The Hyuga clan, under the direction of the then Sandame, provided a lot of sake to entertain the daimyo that night. Normally, the Hyuga would disapprove of such wastes of resources as sake, but because of the daimyo's presence, they had to drink, lest they offend the daimyo. The Hyuga clan as a whole still wonders why a daimyo would find it offensive to refuse to get drunk, especially when his safety depended on them being in their prime. Ultimately, though, unless they wanted their clan to be humiliated, they had to drink as much as the daimyo. Nevertheless, they were humiliated in the end. A young jonin named Heishi had never tasted sake and had no desire to do so, but because of his clan duties, he had gotten very drunk that night, which is when things went wrong. In his drunken haze, he managed to lure the daimyo's daughter into a nearby room, where they had sex and she became pregnant. In addition to disowning his daughter and refusing to recognize a woman who had gotten pregnant outside of marriage as his kin, this scandal cost the Hyuga clan a great deal of prestige and forced the daimyo to relocate his business permanently. The result of that pregnancy was his heir, Hinata Hyuga, who was also the most pitiful Hyuga ever seen. In the hopes that the resulting child would be less of a failure than Hinata, the Hyuga clan employed numerous prohibited medical procedures to remove the woman's DNA and genes from the developing fetus during the subsequent pregnancy, which was with the same woman. The end product was Hanabi Hyuga, a female genetic duplicate of Heishi. Heishi, who was now at the sliding gates of the Hyuga clan council chambers, was being held accountable in part because of the embarrassment that had been brought upon the Hyuga clan despite this victory. Heishi inhaled deeply before carefully reaching for and separating the door. The elders of the Hyuga clan were seated in a circle inside, staring expectantly at him. "You're late," scowled Hieshi's father, the head elder. "A clan leader ought to be more knowledgeable." Heishi maintained his cool. The council meeting was extended by several councillors. It was unavoidable, unless I wished to bring more shame and disgrace upon our clan by simply leaving. His dad grumbled, "As if it were possible for you to bring any more shame upon us than you have already done, which is why you have been called here. Now, be seated." Heishi gritted his teeth and clenched his fist before he sat down slowly in his assigned seat in the chambers. "The Hyuga clan council has convened to decide our clan's future," Hieshi's father said, clearing his throat. He glared at Heishi and said, "I am sure that everyone here knows the reason for that. Our clan has lost a lot of its prestige, power, and influence in the last 10.5 years." Many of the councillors gave Heishi a stern look before returning their focus to the head elder. The head elder continued to say, "After much deliberation amongst my fellow elders, and those who have concern over the future of the Hyuga clan, we feel it prevalent to name a new heir." Although it was true that Hinata would never be suitable to be the clan's heir, Heishi was only slightly alarmed by this. He had planned to name Hanabi as his heir when she was old enough, so he got up and said, "Now wait, I know Hinata is unfit but..." "Heishi, keep quiet. We got into this mess in the first place because of your tongue." With no effort to hide the underlying meaning of his words, his father yelled at him. Although he knew better than to speak again, Heishi gritted his teeth and sat back down slowly, maintaining a stern look that was fixed on his father. "We have agreed that the best choice to become the new heir is Neji Hyuga," Hieshi's father said, disregarding it. Several elders were taken aback by this unawareness, and one of them said, "But Neji is of the branch family, a servant." He is also of one of the pure lineage of the main branch of the Hyuga, despite being Hisashi's child, who was second born. He is the purest member of the main branch who could qualify as heir to the clan, said another elder who had been told the reasoning. Hanabi is a genetic clone of me. She is more than qualified as being pure enough to become clan head one day. Heishi refused to remain silent any longer, despite Hinata's potential to bring shame to the clan. That's right, a genetic clone of you, the one who cast an angry cloud over us, depriving us of our strength and prestige. Can we really risk Hanabi not being the same as you? Because of your mistake, we are hardly a noble clan anymore, his father said. Growling, Heishi said, why you? Enough? With his Byakugan flaring and scarred, Heishi and his father turned to face another counselor and said, this chamber is to discuss politics, lineage, and dictate policies, not to settle petty squabbling matches and bloody the floor. Heishi and his father cooled their tempers and went back to work as the other elders turned to face them. Heishi added, what will happen to Hanabi then? A different elder said, it has been decided that Neji and Hanabi shall be married, and upon the day she is capable of safely giving birth, she will be impregnated by Neji, and she shall give birth to the next generation of the Hyuga clan. Although Heishi was unhappy that his daughter would be used as a breeding factory, there was not much he could do about it at the moment. With a sidelong glance, Hiashi's father said, bring Neji Hyuga to us immediately and make haste. Two shadows on the opposite side of the sliding door vanished and moved so quickly that anyone with weaker eyes couldn't see them. Heishi clenched his fist and glared at his father, vowing to make sure his father paid a heavy price for going over his head. In any case, Heishi was not even on his father's radar at the moment, so he either ignored Hiashi's glare or failed to notice it. After a few minutes, the sliding doors opened, revealing two Hyugas on the opposite side of Neji Hyuga, who didn't appear particularly happy to be there. With a wave of his hand, Hiashi's father said, the two of you are dismissed. Neji stood in the doorway as the two Hyugas left using Shunshin. Neji, come in, please. There is an important matter we must discuss with you, Hiashi's father said, waving his hand again. Neji scowled even more but went in as ordered. The elders whispered to one another as he walked in, studying him carefully. Neji's fists remained clenched throughout, and his stance and nostril flaring betrayed his anxiety. Heishi was unconsciously making the hand gesture to activate Neji's seal and kill him as the elders continued to whisper, but his father's glare dissuaded him from doing so. Right now. Neji Hyuga, do you know why you were called before us? The head elder finally coughed. With his eyes narrowed and his fists still clenched, Neji turned to face the head elder. Every nerve in his body urged him to yell at him, spit hate and venom at him, and many of them even urged him to try to kill the elder. But his logic prevailed, and he said, no, elder, Sama. Neji's annoyance was evident to the head elder, but he ignored it because, following this meeting, the Hyuga clan would no longer be concerned about Neji's hatred. His throat was clearing. You were called here in regards to an important decision the council has made, a decision which involves you. After widening in perplexity, Neji's eyes narrowed even more. What sort of decision? Another elder raised his voice, saying, we have known for years that the Hyuga clan's future is in danger, that our position and strength are eroding to levels that are unworthy of a clan of our size, that our influence has been diminished, and that our prestige has fallen. The origin of this issue was clear, but until recently, we were reluctant to discuss it because of its nature. It is no longer possible to overlook this affliction on our family. Neji gave them a close look and asked, what is this blight? As one elder put it, it is not a what, rather a who. Neji gave the elder a look. The source of our clan's stagnation is Hinata Hyuga, the heiress, the elder said, glaring at Neji. As the firstborn child of the clan head, Heishi Hyuga, Neji's eyes widened in shock and confusion, not understanding what was happening. He had long recognized that Hinata was unfit to lead the clan, but he had thought that the council would follow laws, doctrines, and creeds and thus have Hinata become clan head despite her glaring flaws. Why, then, were they now calling Hinata a blight? When the head elder noticed his perplexity, he clarified, saying, the Hyuga clan itself has been greatly affected by Hinata's most recent setbacks. Her shortcomings at the academy included finishing last among the kunoichi who were able to graduate, one of whom was a civilian girl, and another who belonged to a lower clan. The village lost two significant clients as a result of her cowardly and reclusive personality, which led to continued mission failures shortly after. This failure has damaged our reputation among the nations. The idea that the clan's heiress, who was raised in the most sophisticated arts, was defeated by a member of the cadet branch, which only has access to used scrolls, is the culmination of her most recent failure in the Chunin exams, where you humiliated her. Hearing this statement made Neji's eyes flare with rage. He and many others had always suspected that the main branch of the Hyuga received the truly powerful techniques while the cadet branch received inferior equipment, but hearing it confirmed their suspicions. He charged chakra to his fingertips and prepared to launch himself at the head elder in retaliation. Which is why the council of the Hyuga has decided that Hinata shall be removed as heiress, and you shall take her place as heir to the Hyuga. As soon as he heard those words, time seemed to stop, and his eyes widened until they were nearly impossible to keep in their sockets. What? As a member of the cadet branch with limited resources, you have brought honor and prestige to the Hyuga clan, the elder said once more. Since you won Rookie of the Year, you were paired with a sensei of the caliber of Maeda Gai, one of Konohagakure's most lethal taijutsu experts. With the exception of the missions that your other teammate, Rock Lee, caused to fail, you proceeded to establish a flawless record with each mission you took part in. But more recently, you made it to the final rounds of the Chunin exam after passing the tests administered by 2 different heads of torture and interrogation. We were able to recover some of the prestige that Hinata's ineptitude had taken away from us thanks to you. You are chosen as the Hyuga's heir by the council because of this. In all his years, Neji never imagined that this day would arrive, so he was genuinely shocked beyond comprehension. Another elder went on, you will be trained in all of the main house techniques, gain all the privileges of being heir, and will have your seal removed, provided that you can complete a very important task. Neji glanced at the elders and then down, mentally balancing the advantages and disadvantages. He was being offered the opportunity to become even more powerful than he had been before, to be free, and to assume leadership of the Hyuga when he reached adulthood, but in order to do so, he had to finish a task for the elders. There was only one question on his mind. Was it worthwhile? With his response blazing in his eyes, Neji slowly lifted his head and turned to face the elders. His response: what are you asking me to do, Honorable Council? Was it? Naruto. Since his ascension and his human surrender, Naruto has learned a great deal of things that previously seemed incomprehensible. Before, it seemed like an impossible dream, a fantasy for dreamers and fake psychics, to be able to enter his own mind whenever he wanted, see his own thoughts, his own memories, and the details he had previously been unable to see. However, the concept was no longer merely a reality, it was, or at least ought to have been, too straightforward for words. Naruto blinked violently as he stared at himself, his superior consciousness processing 1,000 thoughts in a split second. He absorbed the specifics of how he had entered his head, what had gone wrong and what had gone right, and why it had gone wrong in the first place. It all came down to experience. He had never before entered his own consciousness or done this as a human, and it was astonishing that he had done so at all after only a little more than a day of being who he was. I am within my mindscape, but I feel off. Clearly something had gone wrong, he said, scowling slightly as he flexed his fingers. He then looked at his other hand and did the same thing again, but the results were the same. Something he had done was not done correctly. He scowled even more and sighed in exhaustion, putting that worry aside for the time being because he had much more important things to do. He looked up in front of him and let his hands drop to his sides. And saw the highborn's mind. The scene in front of him was the most breathtaking, and powerful scenery he had ever seen in his entire life. As if the darkness sucked up all hope and light that touched it, the ground beneath his feet was as dark as the souls of the most deranged mortals, allowing not a drop of light to bounce off its surface. Naruto's foot brushed some of the dirt away as he stepped onto it, exposing a shattered and broken emblem. The field was not just a field, but the scene of a bloody battle, as one could see as the winds caused a little sandstorm to blow across it. The field was littered with broken bones, blades, and shattered armor. Beneath the endless black sands, which concealed another fallen warrior from view, the mangled body of another was exposed. As Naruto continued pushing, he looked at the horizon and noticed that the field he was in was encircled by shattered and broken peaks, and that the burned-out husks of multiple citadels, some of which were still burning, were visible in the distance. Naruto inhaled deeply, savoring the heady scent of the dead plains, then gazed up at the sky and marveled at its splendor. A crimson sun sat above him in the sky, its intensity burning so brightly that the light it emitted made the 3 moons that took their respective places in the sky appear like burning orbs of black stone, illuminating the surface of the charred and shattered lands with an unholy light. As the black storm clouds returned, Naruto continued to gaze at the majestic and dark sky, which was tinted a blackish tone and stained with a burning tone of reds and deep oranges. Then, as the lightning struck the ground, it arced and left scarlet and violet flashes on the sky, turning the black sands into arcing glass before breaking and returning to the dead soil. Naruto paused and saw a magnificent scene that filled his new mind with wonder and wonder. There was a huge lake in the middle of the dead field, with waters as clear as a polished crystal and a silky surface. A number of tiny rivers arced off the lake to create smaller ponds, each of which grew as polluted as the surrounding area, but the lake itself stayed pure. Additionally, there is a single landmass in the middle of the lake, a huge temple that occupies the entire area, and a single bridge that connects the temple to the dead fields. As he advanced, Naruto noticed the bridge's architecture, which had a symmetry to it and was adorned with abrupt outcroppings and sharp, savage curls that made everyone who saw it, aside from himself, of course, fear. Naruto took one step, planted his foot on the bridge, and hurried off in the direction of the distant temple. However, as Naruto continued, the bridge collapsed behind him and sank into the water. In a matter of seconds, the water gradually turned crimson, as though the water turned to blood. However, Naruto ignored it and kept walking toward the temple, not stopping until he arrived at the end of the bridge, where he looked at the enormous structure in front of him. The architecture was not all that different from the bridge, but the ones that were different were useful in addition to being aesthetically beautiful. The spikes that protruded from the bridge carried over to the temple, but seemed to have a defensive function there and offered a grace that no mortal could ever hope to match, no matter how many centuries they tried in vain. The temple's smooth, sturdy arches and corners appeared to support the structures to their sides as well as the structure above it. Naruto couldn't help but be impressed as he looked at the building. It was clearly constructed with a level of forethought that no mortal could ever hope for. There was not a single component added to the structure that did not ultimately serve a purpose. Naruto gazed at the building for a few more seconds before focusing on what were clearly the main features of the buildings in front of him. The three enormous doors were each decorated with a unique set of symbols, shaped and patterned differently, and secured with a unique lock. Naruto glanced at the first gate and then at the doors. He approached it slowly and looked at it. Dozens of esoteric symbols, each seemingly carved with a burning chisel and expertly crafted, adorned the door trim. As he approached, he noticed odd markings on the door's surface, similar to the ones that adorned the trimming, but different. At first glance, the door appeared to be a simple gate made of black stone, much like the black sands that trickled across the dead plains behind him. Upon closer inspection, he noticed that the door itself had markings, but they were also changing every second. Naruto grazed his finger across the symbol that formed as he reached forward, unsure of what had possessed him to do so. He suddenly grabbed his head as a single, strong memory exploded into his mind. A figure, surrounded by the bodies of hundreds of fallen warriors, stood in a wasteland, stabbed one last warrior in the chest, then mercilessly tore out the warrior's broken heart before sloppily throwing their carcass to the ground. The figure gazed at the heart, which was still beating and glowed with a dark and unholy essence. Blood was still gushing from the heart and trickling down his hand, which was encased in elaborate armor that linked to arcane runes that ran up the warrior's biceps. He wore a samurai-style helm on his head, with crown-like projections sticking out. Just enough room was left for his lips to flare before he viciously sank his teeth into the still, pulsing heart while his wings of shadow shrouded his body. Naruto stopped stroking the symbol and grabbed at his hand, which was pulsing with the most ferocious and savage burning feeling he had ever experienced. Naruto looked back up at the gate and cursed a little, but he took a step back when he realized what had happened. When he touched the symbol, it started to glow an unholy purplish color, which spread to hundreds of other runes around it. The runes lit up the same color as the first one, and Naruto could only watch as hundreds, if not thousands, of them did so. But not every rune illuminated. In fact, not even half of them did so overall. Many others continued to be black. A single word, no, a name, burned itself into Naruto's eyes as he gazed at the door and then back at his hand. The Seeker. With a resolute frown on his face, Naruto turned back to face the door and extended his hand, and came into contact with a freshly formed rune that was as black as dead sand. As his mind was compelled to view a memory that was not his own, Naruto grabbed his face. Flaring with the same dark energy that surrounded them, two armored warriors charged forward with their weapons drawn, glowing with a foul and dark energy. With retaliatory intent, they charged forward, but one was swatted aside by a long appendage, and the other was seized by a huge pair of lethal claws. It was brought closer to the one holding it, and the flailing warrior had to look into its captor's eyes. With glowing crimson eyes that stared into his own, the creature that held him was adorned with a closed helm, with two crescent-shaped spikes curved upwards and a sinister glow emanating from slits in the helm. The twisted and genuinely unholy helm parted. As the warrior thrashed in a futile attempt to escape, the helm opened to reveal a set of dried blood-stained jaws with dagger-shaped teeth. With a rumbling roar, the monster smashed into the flailing warrior, tearing out his still-beating heart and tearing his chest open with his jaws before swallowing it whole. The other warrior was pierced through his lower back, and a club like shape with 3 vicious spikes erupted from his stomach. He barely managed to push itself up and attempted to limp away in a futile attempt to escape. The movements of the tail turned the warrior around as he started to feel his insides being torn apart, and he saw a tall, monstrous figure with 4 burned and tattered angelic wings on his left and 4 tattered draconic wings on his right. While his hand continued to burn as before, Naruto gasped softly and gripped his head in shock at the unexpected vision. After a moment, he glanced back up at the enormous door and saw that the symbol he had touched was filled with an unholy, dark crimson that, like the runes the first time, trailed across hundreds of others. Feeling another name burn into his mind, Naruto scowled. Sin terror. As Naruto glanced up at the door, it became evident what it represented: the memories of the people who had turned him. With a small sigh, Naruto turned to face the second door. It was simple, the symbols were well known, the structure. It was so human. Naruto scoffed at this door, since it was useless to him now and wasn't the reason he had come. Finally, he focused on the last door, which was the most ostentatious of all. He saw a door in front of him that glowed with strength and reverberated with such force that he could not ignore it no matter how hard he tried. The door was enormous, tall enough to dwarf Konohagakure's walls, and it made everyone who saw it frightened. Even he became a little worried when he saw it. The door appeared to emerge from the earth like an unholy tree, solid and sturdy, unwavering and unrelenting. Strong. The gate's surface was the same, but the trim appeared to move and shift as it occupied this one area. He saw hundreds of skeletons, rotting carcasses, and mortals, beasts, demons, and others trapped in time for all eternity on the surface of this gate. Root. Like growths entangled in the corpses that adorned the gates grasped the outer rim of the door, but it was the ethereal lock that kept it closed that attracted Naruto's attention. Huge chains that were so large that one of them was wider than a street in Konohagakure were tearing from the dark temple. They were made of an energy that glowed with a power and light that made Naruto cover his eyes when he stared at it for too long. 10 of these chains, which were joined by a huge lock in the dead center of the enormous gate, tore themselves from the temple's surface. Because it was composed of skulls, bones, and metal that reverberated with a hollowness he had never experienced before, the lock appeared to have been forged from the bodies of 1,000 dead. In the dead center of the lock was a glowing orb that was the same color as the chains and filled with an endless maelstrom. As Naruto gazed at the door, he sensed its strength, presence, and intensity. He could categorically state that it was the most powerful thing he had ever experienced in his life. The strength of those who shaped him into what he is dwarfed. With such power and an aura that was neither holy nor unholy, one would think that such a formidable figure would make people want to run, hide, and get as far away from them as possible. However, Naruto was unable to do so and refused to. He had a stated reason for entering his mindscape, and he became aware of the reason behind the gate in front of him. "This is troublesome. I need to enter so I can," he said, crossing his arms and closely examining the gates. The door creaked, the chains shook, and the door itself pulsed, interrupting Naruto's thoughts. When the door closed, the chains that held it in place broke and fell to the ground like a rain of shattered crystal, seeping into the ground like new rain. The limbs on the door's outer edge started to move and creak, and the designs on the door itself started to move as though it had just woken up from an endless sleep. The skeletons and corpses on its surface moaned and shrieked as they tore themselves from the door's surface, and the door itself moaned under the pressure of being opened. Every time the central locking piece turned, a thunderous click that sounded like a gong was released. The corpses reached out to Naruto after nearly removing themselves from the door. Another pulse erupted, tearing the corpses into ribbons as the central lock clicked one last time. Their remains turned into a black wave that tore its way forward as the corpses screamed in pain as they fell from their perch. The wave appeared to split at Naruto's approach, flowing to either side and into the blood-red lake, which soon started to boil. The door itself started to fall out like a snowfall, crumbling as though it were composed of sand, but just before it hit the ground, it stopped, created a huge cloud, and blasted into the air. Naruto glanced in the direction of the black cloud and saw it dart through the air, changing and flowing like a water snake. Like the door it held closed, the central lock appeared to hover in place for a brief moment before falling towards the ground and becoming a cloud of shattered and broken dust that flew through the air. Naruto turned to face the path in front of him, which was once blocked by a door that no summon could ever enter but was now as open as a deserted cemetery. Naruto scowled as he examined the door's trim. "It broke when I wanted it to, which isn't shocking, but what is it?" That was the question that was circling around in his mind. The answer to this question, which he so desperately wanted, would have to wait. It would be foolish for him to just abandon his path out of curiosity because he had come here for a reason. He pushed forward, into the inner sanctum, toward his destination with a firm step. Naruto gazed at the walls in front of him as he ventured deeper and deeper into this secret subconscious of his own mind. They were just plain walls of brick, like the walls in the sewers under Konohagakure. His feet scraped the floor beneath them, resembling an empty sewer drain that had been exposed to the sun to dry. He could see that the floors were covered in dried filth and the walls were dirty, with visible water damage. Naruto scowled and continued on, never stopping, in search of the journey's entrance. As he continued, he pondered what might be here and what was causing the strange pulse he had experienced earlier. The pulse from the gate was completely different from what he felt in the real world, so it was not the gate and could not have been. Like falling off a cliff and not being able to see the bottom, the pulse emanating from the gate was hollow and never ending. There was more to the pulse he had felt earlier. It was as if he were being summoned, albeit subconsciously rather than consciously. Which begged the question: what might have been the call? Naruto could no longer bear to think about this line of reasoning because it had persisted for so long. Naruto glared at the walls, the floor, the bricks. Everything was the same. Nothing had changed since he had entered this miserable place. I have been in here for. Naruto growled and pressed his hand against the wall while running his fingers through his hair. His thoughts abruptly stopped and he realized something. How long he had been in here was a mystery to him. Minutes. Hours. Days. It was as if time itself had stopped, as if everything had stopped for him. He had no idea how long he had been in here. He straightened his shoulders, clenched his fist, and gritted his teeth before pushing forward, saying, "I will not let this effort go to waste." With a firm thought, he stepped forward and brushed his hand off the wall slowly. And in an instant, the wall behind him started to collapse. Unaware that the wall was breaking and fracturing, Naruto kept moving forward. Naruto persisted in his quest to discover the origin of his motivation. Crack. When he abruptly turned around, he saw the change his mind was undergoing, and his eyes partially widened. In the warming sun, the floor and walls were disintegrating like a wall of ice. An intense and never-ending veil encircled the entire tunnel, which was now breaking apart as the floor and walls collapsed. He saw the floors split and crack, creating floating piles of debris that extended into the limitless space in front of him. He saw the veil in front of him as the floors and walls cracked. It resembled the auroras he had seen in the skies of Hai no Kuni as a child, but they twisted and swirled like a tornado's eye, swirling with colors he had never seen before that he could even begin to describe. Naruto only blinked once during the entire incident, which was sufficient to cause the tunnel to collapse, aside from the one section he was standing on. Naruto turned to face the veil in front of him, and he saw hundreds of water, damaged stone and broken brick masses floating in the air. The colors of the veil shone off the shattered debris, shedding sunlight on them like shattered crystals. He noticed something distinct from everything else in the ether as he peered through the veil. A huge sphere made of shadows. The sphere, which by all accounts shouldn't be there, caught Naruto's full attention. In an endless existence of consistency, it was a strangeness. Why was it here? He strode forward to the edge of his platform, seeking a way to cross the veil, the question overwhelming him. After a while that he was unable to even sense, Naruto saw that there was no way to reach the sphere of shadows. His face furrowed in annoyance. Why couldn't he just will himself to have a way to reach the sphere from here? Crack. Naruto's focus was drawn to a nearby platform that started to collapse, the fragments drifting in his direction. Like the moon in the elemental nation's skies, Naruto watched as the pieces revolved around him every single day. When they finally stopped orbiting, he saw the fragments drift to the edge of his platform and join. Building a bridge. Naruto looked up and gazed absently at the bridge. The sphere was in the direction of the bridge. With renewed determination, Naruto advanced, and as he did so, the stones beneath his feet glowed with arcane runes. The bridge behind him would collapse to make room for the bridge ahead as he continued to his destination, each step creating a new row of stone and bricks. With his eyes fixed on the sphere, Naruto quickened his pace, and the forming bridge followed suit. At last, Naruto slid to a stop and looked at the target of his intent, just 5 inches away. Naruto stepped forward and extended his hand, anticipating some resistance when he touched the sphere, but as he got closer, the sphere broke apart. The shadow of the sphere rippled apart to make room for Naruto's path as he took a single step forward, allowing a smirk to align his features. The shadows that had concealed this place from Naruto's view disappeared with every step he took, exposing all the secrets it had once concealed. When the darkness lifted, Naruto turned to see that he was standing on a huge platform that could easily accommodate a sizable chunk of Konohagakure. He thought, what was so important about this place that the very shadows of my mind hid it from view? as he saw this. He was unaware of the imminence of the revelation of the answer to his question. Less platform became visible as the shadows continued to fade, and a structure that appeared to be strong and resilient even in this place of unending decay started to emerge. Naruto gazed at the building, which was still just barely obscured by the darkness, only to halt when he sensed the pulse once more. After a brief moment of lurching, he looked up and saw the shadows start to writhe and disperse in a last-ditch effort to hide the building. Narrowing his eyes, Naruto pressed on, unable to let the darkness of his thoughts stop him. Even though the shadows attempted to stick to the structure and cover it completely, his presence forced them back. "Be gone," said Naruto with a sneer as he reached forward. And the shadows scattered like a terrible autumn wind. And the secret they attempted to conceal came to light. A series of emotions, including shock, bewilderment, and rage, passed through Naruto's eyes as he continued to stare straight ahead. What he saw was simply not possible. He had been assured and promised that what he was witnessing was not possible in the entire universe. No, it was real. He could not deny what he saw in front of him. It was as real as his own flesh. The people who had made the promises to him had assumed that the machines they had been using were human, made and would be simple to bend, break, and undo. They believed that men, mortals, were the ones who created the thing that bound him. However, he could see that they had made a crucial mistake in their presumptions. The work of God could not be undone by anyone, not even the highborn. Thus, a single slit opened to reveal a crimson eye as one shadow advanced, and the pulse started to advance with the same intensity he had previously experienced. All Naruto could say was, "Hello, Kyubi."
That's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed this great story. See you in the next one.